Long before there are temples, priests, scriptures, or even villages, there is darkness. Not the darkness of a room with a lamp waiting somewhere nearby, but the absolute darkness of a prehistoric night, broken only by firelight, stars, and the movement of things beyond sight. A small human group settles beneath a rock shelter while wind moves through the grass outside. Somewhere in the distance, an animal calls. A child wakes from a dream. An older member of the group is missing from the circle because that person died days earlier, yet memories of the dead remain vivid enough to feel almost present. Above them, the sky is crowded with lights no one can reach. Around them, the landscape is filled with dangers they can sometimes hear but cannot see. For people living in such a world, the visible surface of reality may never have seemed complete. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The question of why humans invented gods is deceptively difficult because it assumes there was a single moment when religion began. Archaeology gives no such moment. There is no first temple that can confidently be called the birthplace of belief, no first figurine that proves someone imagined a deity, and no surviving sentence from deep prehistory declaring that the world contains invisible beings. Instead, the evidence appears gradually, scattered across hundreds of thousands of years, and much of it remains ambiguous. Stones can survive, bones can survive, pigments sometimes survive. Thoughts do not. Yet something about the human relationship with the world begins to look different as prehistoric evidence accumulates. Early humans are not merely surviving landscapes. They are increasingly marking them, remembering places, treating bodies in unusual ways, collecting objects with no obvious practical use, and perhaps assigning meaning to animals, caves, colours, and the dead. Scholars still debate exactly when these behaviours become symbolic in the full human sense. But what survives in the record suggests that the foundations of religion are much older than cities and farming. One possible beginning lies in something extremely ordinary uncertainty. For most of human evolution, life is surrounded by causes that cannot be directly understood. Disease arrives without warning. A healthy person develops fever and dies. Lightning strikes a tree. Rain fails. A river floods. Animals migrate away. A woman gives birth successfully while another dies during labor. A hunter disappears beyond the ridge. Dreams bring dead relatives back with startling clarity. Without modern knowledge of microbes, atmospheric physics, genetics, or ecology, events can still be observed carefully, but their deeper causes remain hidden. Humans are unusually uncomfortable with hidden causes. The brain searches for explanations, especially explanations involving intention. A branch moving in the dark might be wind, but it might also be a predator. Treating every movement as meaningless is dangerous. Treating some meaningless movement as an intentional threat wastes energy, but usually does not kill anyone over evolutionary time. This imbalance may have favoured minds that are quick to detect agency, even when certainty is impossible. That does not mean religion is simply a mistake produced by frightened brains. The reality is more complicated. Human beings also possess extraordinary social intelligence. They constantly infer what other people know, want, fear, and intend. A person can understand that another person is angry without seeing anger as a physical object. Desire is invisible. Memory is invisible. Intention is invisible. Yet these invisible things clearly affect the visible world. Once a mind is capable of imagining unseen intentions inside other humans, Extending that logic beyond humans may not be a large step. A storm behaves violently. A river gives life and then takes it away. A successful hunt may seem like a gift. A failed hunt may feel like refusal. The landscape begins to contain not only objects but possible personalities. Anthropologists have often found that traditional societies do not necessarily divide reality into the same categories familiar to modern industrial cultures. Animals, ancestors, rivers, mountains, weather, and places may participate in social relationships. Hunters can treat prey with ritual respect. Certain locations may be approached carefully. The dead may remain members of the community in some meaningful sense. These patterns vary enormously, and modern hunter-gatherers cannot simply be treated as living fossils of the Paleolithic, but they demonstrate how naturally human social thinking can extend beyond living people. The earliest religious worlds, if they can be called religious at all, may therefore have contained no gods in the later sense. There may have been no supreme creator, no moral judge, no organized pantheon. Instead, there may have been a crowded, invisible environment of forces, presences, ancestors, dangerous places, helpful animals, and beings encountered through dreams or altered states. Evidence from prehistoric art deepens the mystery. By tens of thousands of years ago, people are entering caves and creating images in places far removed from normal daylight activity. In some European caves, painted animals appear deep underground where illumination requires lamps or torches. The famous images include horses, bison, lions, rhinoceroses, mammoths, and strange signs. Human figures are comparatively rare and sometimes unusual or distorted. It is tempting to call these caves sanctuaries, and some researchers have done so, but certainty is impossible. The paintings may involve ritual, storytelling, teaching, hunting traditions, social identity, altered states, or combinations of functions that no modern category captures neatly. No single explanation fully accounts for the diversity of cave art. Still, entering deep underground to create images is not an ordinary practical task. It requires effort, light, planning, and repeated visits. Some chambers possess unusual acoustics. Others contain natural shapes that artists incorporated into animal forms, almost as if creatures were already hidden inside the stone and needed only to be revealed. Whether this reflects religion in the later institutional sense is doubtful. Whether it reflects a symbolic world richer than immediate survival is much harder to deny. A lesser-known detail makes the picture stranger. In several prehistoric caves, people left hand stencils by placing a hand against the wall and blowing pigment around it. The result is not a portrait but a negative absence, an outline where the body once touched stone. Tens of thousands of years later, those hands remain visible while the people themselves are gone. Some belong to adults, some perhaps to younger individuals, and their exact meaning remains unknown. These marks suggest that prehistoric people were doing something humans still do today, making presence endure beyond the moment. Memory becomes material. And memory may be one of the deepest roots of religion. Humans do not simply notice death. They remember the person who died. They dream about them. They return to places associated with them. They recognize that the body is motionless while the social individual remains active in thought. That contradiction is profound. A dead person is clearly absent, yet psychologically present. Before anyone builds a temple to a god, human beings must first confront this impossible-seeming divide between body and person. Once that divide becomes imaginable, another possibility emerges. Perhaps a person can continue without the body. Perhaps the dead remain nearby. Perhaps the unseen world is not empty after all. The archaeological traces of that possibility lead directly into some of the oldest and most haunting evidence for early belief: the deliberate treatment of the dead. The invisible world does not begin with a temple. It begins inside the human mind, in a nervous system built to survive uncertainty. Somewhere on an open plain, a hunter hears grass move behind him. The sound may be nothing more than wind, but if he assumes that too quickly, the mistake could be fatal. If instead he imagines a hidden predator and turns to look, he may waste a few seconds, but he survives. Over countless generations, this asymmetry matters. Human perception becomes tuned not merely to detect movement, but to search for agency behind movement, intention behind events, and minds behind actions. This tendency is so ordinary that it is easy to overlook. Humans constantly interpret the world socially. A person does not merely see another body walking toward a fire. The observer immediately begins inferring what that person wants, whether they are angry, whether they are carrying food, whether they intend to help, whether they are hiding something. Much of social life depends on this ability to imagine mental states that cannot be directly seen. Thoughts have no color. Intentions make no sound. Beliefs have no physical shape. Yet human beings treat these invisible properties as real because they clearly produce consequences. Cognitive scientists sometimes describe part of this capacity as theory of mind, the ability to attribute beliefs, desires, knowledge, and intentions to others. It becomes one of the defining features of complex human social intelligence. The same mental machinery that allows someone to understand a rival, care for a child, coordinate a hunt, or detect deception, may also make it possible to imagine non-human agents whose intentions cannot be observed directly. A strange noise in darkness is therefore not processed as an abstract physical event alone. It may be interpreted as something doing something. A sudden storm may appear violent. A river may seem generous when it floods gently and hostile when it destroys a camp. An animal that repeatedly escapes hunters may acquire a reputation for cunning beyond ordinary animal behavior. A mountain that dominates the horizon appears permanent, while generations of people are born and die beneath it. The human mind is exceptionally good at turning patterns into stories of agency. This does not mean prehistoric people were naive or incapable of practical explanations. Hunter-gatherers often possess extremely sophisticated ecological knowledge. They track weather, animal behavior, plant cycles, water sources, seasons, and landscapes with precision that modern outsiders may lack. Natural knowledge and supernatural interpretation are not opposites that must replace one another. A person can understand when an animal migrates and still believe there is meaning in the success of a particular hunt. A community can know how storms develop seasonally, while also treating a storm as socially significant. The most important point is that religion may not begin when humans fail to understand nature. It may begin when humans understand the world through the same social intelligence they use to understand one another. Psychologists have also studied what is sometimes called hyperactive agency detection, the tendency to perceive agents even in ambiguous situations. The term can sound as though human beings are simply hallucinating intention everywhere, but the underlying idea is more subtle. Detecting agency quickly is useful in environments full of predators, rivals, allies, and prey. Evolution does not reward perfect philosophical accuracy. It rewards survival often enough to reproduce. The cost of a false alarm is usually small. The cost of ignoring a real threat can be enormous. As a result, people may be predisposed to interpret uncertain events in ways that favor agency. Even modern humans do this constantly. Faces appear in rock formations. A creaking house seems occupied. A computer appears stubborn. People become angry at machines that refuse to cooperate, although they know the machine has no intentions at all. The tendency survives in environments far removed from the Pleistocene. But agency detection alone cannot explain gods. A rustle mistaken for a predator disappears the moment someone discovers the wind. Religion is more persistent, more structured, and deeply social. Something else is required: memory, imagination, communication, and the ability to construct beings that are absent yet mentally present. Humans are especially good at maintaining relationships with individuals who are not physically nearby. A hunter can think about someone who stayed at camp. A child can remember a parent who left days earlier. A group can plan around the expected actions of people who are currently invisible. Once language becomes sufficiently sophisticated, people can discuss agents who are not present at all. This ability has enormous consequences. A person can be physically absent yet socially active. Someone several kilometers away can still influence decisions because others know what that person expects. A respected elder who has died may remain even more psychologically powerful. Their advice is remembered, their habits are imitated, their disapproval can be imagined, their personality continues to occupy other minds. From here, the conceptual distance between an absent person and an invisible spirit becomes surprisingly small. One of the most intriguing features of human cognition is that people often find it difficult to imagine complete non-existence. When considering a dead individual, the body can clearly stop functioning, yet the mind instinctively continues assigning knowledge or perspective to that person. Experiments with children and adults suggest that imagining the total disappearance of mental states is cognitively difficult. The dead person may still be imagined as knowing, wanting, seeing, or feeling something, even when someone explicitly understands biological death. Such findings cannot tell researchers what Paleolithic people believed. Modern experiments are not archaeological evidence, yet they reveal cognitive tendencies that may help explain why concepts of surviving spirits appear so widely across human cultures. Dreams intensify the effect. A person can bury a relative and then see the relative alive during sleep. The dream may involve movement, speech, fear, affection, or ordinary daily activity. To a modern person familiar with neuroscience, the experience may still feel emotionally powerful. To prehistoric people without a concept of dreaming as internally generated brain activity, the boundary between encounter and memory may have been far less obvious. The dead are absent during the day and present during dreams. Animals can appear in dreams too. Places can become charged with remembered experiences. Coincidences can seem connected. A successful hunt may follow a vivid dream of the prey. Someone dreams of a storm. Then rain arrives. Most such coincidences leave no archaeological trace, yet they could strongly reinforce beliefs that thoughts and external events are connected. Another cognitive tendency compounds the effect. Humans are relentless pattern detectors. They notice repetitions even when those repetitions occur by chance. This ability is essential to learning. Recognizing that certain clouds predict rain or that animals gather near water can mean survival. But a brain optimized to detect meaningful patterns will sometimes find meaning where none exists. A ritual performed before a successful hunt may therefore be repeated. If success follows again, the association strengthens. Failures can be explained in many ways. Perhaps the ritual was done incorrectly. Perhaps an unseen being was displeased. Perhaps another force interfered. Belief systems can become resilient because they are supported not by one cognitive tendency, but by several working together. Agency detection finds minds, pattern detection finds connections, memory preserves exceptional events, dreams create encounters with absent beings. Language allows those experiences to be shared. Social learning passes interpretations between generations. Ritual makes them repeatable. No single explanation fully accounts for religion, and scholars still debate how much weight should be given to each cognitive mechanism. Some researchers emphasize evolutionary adaptations. Others see religion as a byproduct of mental abilities that evolved for different purposes, and still others argue that cultural evolution later transformed these tendencies into something far more complex than their biological foundations. What survives in the record cannot show the exact thoughts moving through prehistoric minds. Yet by the time clearly symbolic behavior becomes widespread, humans possess a remarkable cognitive toolkit. They can imagine beings they cannot see, assign intentions to forces around them, remember the absent, share invisible concepts through language, and detect meaning in patterns scattered across an unpredictable world. Those abilities alone do not create gods, but they create a mind in which gods can exist. And among all the experiences that might have pushed invisible beings from possibility into conviction, none was more powerful than the experience humans could never escape watching another person die, while somehow continuing to feel that the person was still there. A body lies still, but the person does not disappear from the minds of those who knew them. Their face can still be recalled. Their habits remain familiar. Their place beside the fire feels strangely occupied by absence. Someone may wake from sleep convinced, for a few moments, that the dead have returned. Someone else may carry an object that belonged to them. Another may avoid the place where they died. In this gap between biological death and social memory, one of the oldest possible pathways toward religion begins to emerge. The archaeological record of death is fragmentary, but it is also among the most emotionally powerful evidence left by prehistoric people. Long before writing, humans sometimes treated bodies in ways that went beyond simple disposal. They placed the dead in pits, arranged bodies deliberately, added pigments, returned to remains, moved bones, removed skulls, or deposited objects nearby. Each act is difficult to interpret. A burial is not automatically proof of belief in an afterlife. Bodies can be buried for sanitation, protection from scavengers, memory, attachment, or practical reasons. Yet when burial becomes repeated, deliberate, and symbolically elaborate, the possibility of ideas about death becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Some of the oldest disputed evidence comes from archaic humans rather than Homo sapiens alone. Neanderthals, who lived across Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, sometimes appear to have deliberately buried their dead. Sites such as Shanidar Cave in present-day Iraq have played an important role in these debates. Several Neanderthal skeletons were found there, some apparently placed in graves. One individual survived serious injuries and disabilities for years before death, suggesting sustained social care. Another became famous because pollen found around the remains was once interpreted as evidence that flowers had been placed in the grave. The so-called flower burial captured the imagination because it seemed to show tenderness across tens of thousands of years. Later research complicated the story. Burrowing animals may have introduced some of the pollen, and scholars still debate exactly what happened. The detail is important because it demonstrates a broader problem in prehistoric religion. The evidence often invites powerful stories before it allows secure conclusions. Even without flowers, deliberate burial among Neanderthals is increasingly taken seriously at several sites. Whether this reflects spiritual beliefs remains uncertain, but it shows that concern for the dead did not suddenly appear with later agricultural societies. The emotional and social treatment of death may extend deep into the evolutionary history of humans and their close relatives. Among early Homo sapiens, the evidence becomes richer. At Kafsa Cave in what is now Israel, anatomically modern humans were buried roughly 100,000 years ago. One burial contained the remains of a young individual associated with deer antlers. Red ochre also appears in some burials from the region. Such details are difficult to explain as simple disposal. Ochre is particularly intriguing. This iron-rich mineral, usually red or yellow, appears again and again in prehistoric sites across Africa, Europe, and elsewhere. It can have practical uses in hide processing, adhesives, body decoration, or protection from sunlight and insects. But red ochre is also repeatedly associated with symbolic behavior, and in later contexts it often appears with the dead. Its color may have mattered. Red resembles blood. It can transform skin and objects dramatically. It stains stone, bone, and earth in a way that survives long after organic materials vanish. Some prehistoric burials seem almost saturated with it. Whether this represents life, rebirth, protection, identity, or something entirely different is unknown. The evidence remains incomplete, and no universal meaning can be assigned to a pigment used across enormous spans of time and geography. Still, a color becomes part of death. By the Upper Paleolithic, some burials are astonishingly elaborate. At Sunghir, near modern Vladimir in Russia, people living more than 30,000 years ago buried several individuals with thousands of ivory beads, pierced animal teeth, carved objects, and long spears made from straightened mammoth ivory. Two younger individuals were placed head-to-head in one remarkable grave. Producing those beads required enormous labor. Each one had to be shaped, drilled, and likely sewn onto clothing. The dead carried objects that had cost the living considerable time. This suggests that some individuals possessed identities or social significance that continued to matter after death. The grave does not tell researchers exactly what people at Sunghir believed, but it reveals something crucial: death had become a stage for social meaning. The presence of valuable objects raises a difficult question. Were grave goods intended for the dead, displayed for the living, or both? Later societies frequently bury food, tools, weapons, ornaments, and personal belongings with the deceased because they believe those objects will be useful in another existence. But archaeologists cannot automatically project those beliefs backward. An object might instead symbolize status, kinship, memory, grief, or the identity of the community conducting the burial. Yet the concept of an afterlife is not cognitively difficult to imagine. A dead person can continue living in dreams. Their personality persists in memory. Their possessions still seem associated with them. The body appears empty while the person, in a psychological sense, remains strangely present. From that experience, a dualistic idea can emerge naturally. Perhaps the body and the person are not identical. This distinction appears in many later cultures as concepts of soul, spirit, breath, shadow, essence, or life force. These ideas vary dramatically and should not be collapsed into a single universal doctrine. Some societies imagine multiple spiritual components rather than one soul. Others see the dead as transforming rather than simply continuing. Some believe ancestors remain nearby, while others send the dead into distant realms. What may be ancient is not any one theology, but the basic intuition that death does not entirely erase social personhood. Human memory strengthens that intuition. The dead continue affecting behavior. An elder's instructions can guide decisions years after death. A parent remains emotionally present to adult children. A feared rival can still influence choices because people remember the danger associated with them. The dead may therefore retain authority without being physically present. Once communities begin treating deceased individuals as active members of social life, ancestor traditions become possible. This is not speculation without parallels. Ancestor veneration is documented widely in historic and ethnographic societies. The dead may be offered food, consulted symbolically, invoked in disputes, asked for protection, or feared when neglected. Land can become connected to ancestral burial. Kinship can be legitimized through descent from remembered or mythical forebears. A grave becomes not merely a place containing a body, but a point where social identity, territory, and memory converge. Deep prehistory offers only traces of such practices, but some sites hint that people returned repeatedly to the dead. Human remains were sometimes manipulated after decomposition. Skulls were removed or stored separately. Bones were rearranged. At other sites, bodies were exposed, processed, or deposited collectively. These actions can appear disturbing through modern eyes, yet they may have been acts of care rather than desecration. In many cultures, the transformation of a corpse is part of a long funerary process. Death is not always understood as an instant event. The body changes, and the social identity of the deceased changes with it. This idea becomes especially visible much later. In early farming communities where skulls were sometimes separated from skeletons, remodeled with plaster, and kept among the living. But the roots of such behavior may reach much deeper. A surprising clue comes from the simple fact that humans often live with the material traces of earlier generations. A shelter can contain old hearths, abandoned tools, burials, and familiar landmarks. People grow up in places where others have already lived and died. The landscape itself becomes layered with memory. A cave is no longer merely a cave once grandparents are buried there. A hill becomes more than a hill if generations return to it. An animal species can carry inherited stories. A particular tree, spring, or stone may become associated with events no living person witnessed. Religion, in this sense, may begin partly as memories stretch beyond individual lifetimes. The dead extend the social world backward through time. They create invisible communities larger than the living population. They make identity depend on people who are no longer physically present. They turn places into repositories of meaning. And once the dead can remain socially real despite being unseen, the idea of other unseen beings becomes easier to sustain. Yet death is only one route into that invisible world. Every night, even the living cross another boundary. The body lies motionless while the mind travels through impossible landscapes, encounters animals, hears voices, relives fear, and sees the dead walking again. For prehistoric humans, dreams may have been not merely strange images during sleep, but experiences powerful enough to blur the line between memory, spirit, and reality itself. Sleep does something extraordinary to the human sense of reality. The body remains beside the fire, breathing slowly, while the mind appears to travel somewhere else. A dead parent returns alive, A distant animal stands close enough to touch. A person falls from a cliff and wakes unharmed. Someone who has never crossed a mountain may dream of landscapes that do not exist. For modern people, dreams can still feel disturbingly real for several moments after waking. For prehistoric people, living without neuroscience, psychology, or a clear distinction between internally generated imagery and external experience, dreams may have carried an even more powerful authority. This does not mean that early humans were incapable of recognizing dreams as different from waking life. The evidence cannot tell us how they categorized them. Many later societies distinguish dreams from ordinary perception while still treating certain dreams as meaningful encounters, warnings, journeys, or communications. What matters is that dreams provide repeated experiences in which invisible or absent beings seem present. The dead speak. Animals behave like persons. People appear to leave their bodies. Strange places are visited and then vanish at sunrise. Experiences like these could make the idea of an unseen realm feel less like an abstract theory and more like something personally encountered. Dreaming is only one altered state available to human beings. Exhaustion, fever, fasting, pain, rhythmic movement, intense fear, sleep deprivation, psychoactive plants, sensory isolation, and certain neurological conditions can all change perception. Under these conditions, people may see vivid patterns, hear voices, experience the sensation of floating outside the body, lose their normal sense of identity, or feel that another presence is nearby. Such experiences occur across cultures and do not require formal religion. They arise from the capacities of the human nervous system itself. One of the most intriguing possibilities is that some prehistoric ritual traditions deliberately sought these altered states. Archaeologists and anthropologists have sometimes connected deep caves, repetitive music, dancing, fasting, smoke, and psychoactive substances with trance. But caution is essential. A painted cave is not automatically a shamanic sanctuary, and a strange image is not proof of hallucination. Scholars still debate how often altered states can genuinely be identified from prehistoric remains. Even so, the connection is difficult to dismiss entirely because similar practices appear again and again in documented societies. Rhythmic drumming can alter attention and bodily awareness. Repetitive dancing can produce exhaustion and dissociation. Fasting changes metabolism. Darkness removes ordinary visual reference points. Flickering firelight makes stationary surfaces appear to move. Echoes distort sound. In a deep cave, where familiar daylight disappears completely. The human nervous system is placed in an unusual sensory environment. Imagine entering such a cave with only a small stone lamp or torch. The ceiling narrows, smoke collects overhead. Shadows move across uneven walls. A painted bison seems to shift as flame trembles. Footsteps return as echoes. The outside world becomes remote. Someone begins making a repetitive sound. Another person breathes rapidly from exertion and fear. The stone chamber feels less like an ordinary location and more like a threshold. Some Paleolithic caves appear to have been visited repeatedly over generations. In places, footprints survive in soft clay far beyond the reach of daylight. Handprints and finger tracings appear on walls. Objects were sometimes deposited in unusual chambers. Many of the paintings are located deep underground rather than near convenient habitation areas. These patterns have encouraged interpretations involving ritual journeys, initiation, storytelling, communal ceremonies, or encounters with supernatural beings. Yet there is no universal explanation. Some caves may have served different purposes from others. Art may have changed meaning across thousands of years. What survives in the record suggests repeated symbolic engagement with underground environments, but the exact experiences attached to those places remain beyond recovery. The imagery itself sometimes seems to blur ordinary biological categories. Human-animal hybrids appear occasionally in Upper Paleolithic art, though their interpretation is disputed. One famous example from the cave of Les Trois Frères in France has been described as a figure combining human and animal traits. Older interpretations called it a sorcerer or shaman. More cautious researchers note that the drawing is complex, partially superimposed with other images, and difficult to reconstruct with certainty. Another remarkable object comes from Hohenstein-Stadel cave in Germany. This so-called Lion Man, carved from mammoth ivory more than 35,000 years ago, combines a human-like body with the head of a cave lion. It is one of the earliest known examples of a clearly imagined composite being. The carving is important because nothing exactly like it existed in nature. Whoever made it was not simply reproducing an animal that had been seen. The maker combined categories in the mind and gave physical form to something impossible. That ability is fundamental to religion. Gods, spirits, monsters, ancestors with extraordinary powers, and beings that shift between animal and human forms all depend on imagination that can construct entities beyond direct experience. Producing the Lion Man required extraordinary investment. Mammoth ivory is difficult to work. Experimental reconstructions suggest that carving an object of this complexity with Stone Age tools would have required many hours of skilled labor. Someone or some group considered the image important enough to spend valuable time creating it in a world where survival itself demanded constant effort. Its meaning is unknown. It might represent a supernatural being, a mythic figure, a human wearing animal symbolism, or something for which modern categories are inadequate. No single explanation fully accounts for it, but its existence reveals that humans were capable of imagining beings that occupied more than one world at once. Animals may have played an especially important role in early spiritual thought because prehistoric people lived in constant proximity to them. Animals provided meat, hide, bone, sinew, tools, danger, competition, and information about the environment. Hunters had to understand animal behavior intimately. They knew tracks, migration routes, mating seasons, alarm calls, feeding areas, and signs invisible to inexperienced observers. At the same time, animals possessed abilities humans lacked. Birds moved through the sky. Fish disappeared beneath water. Bears vanished into caves and returned after winter. Wolves hunted cooperatively in darkness. Large predators saw, smelled, or heard things humans could not. A deer could sense danger before a person noticed anything. Such abilities may easily have acquired spiritual significance. A hunter could kill an animal, yet also depend on animals returning season after season. This creates a relationship that is practical, emotional, and potentially moral. In many later hunting societies, prey are not treated as passive resources. Animals may be understood as persons of another kind, beings that offer themselves under certain conditions or must be treated respectfully after death. Ethnographic examples cannot be projected directly into the Paleolithic, but they show that hunting does not necessarily produce a sharp boundary between practical ecology and spiritual relationships. For people whose survival depends on animals, the animal world can be social as well as biological. Altered states may intensify these relationships. During trance or dreams, A person can experience becoming an animal, speaking with one, following it into another realm, or receiving knowledge from it. Modern neurological explanations can describe how such experiences arise, but neurological origin does not make them culturally meaningless. A vivid internal experience becomes part of shared tradition when it is remembered, narrated, repeated, and interpreted by others. This is where specialists may begin to emerge. In many historically documented societies, certain individuals become particularly associated with healing, divination, spirit communication, trance, or ritual knowledge. The broad term shaman is often used for some of these figures, though it originates in specific Northern Asian traditions and should not be applied carelessly to every prehistoric ritual specialist. The functions vary widely. Some heal, some communicate with ancestors, some conduct ceremonies, some interpret dreams or animal behavior, some claim to journey into invisible realms. Prehistoric archaeology cannot identify a shaman with certainty simply from an unusual burial or artifact. Earlier researchers sometimes labelled almost any strange prehistoric figure a shaman, creating interpretations that outran the evidence. More recent approaches are generally more cautious. Still, specialization is plausible. Human groups frequently contain individuals known for particular skills: excellent hunters, toolmakers, healers, storytellers, navigators, or mediators. Knowledge of plants, anatomy, dreams, ritual performance, and unusual psychological states could also become specialized. Healing may have been especially important. Illness presents one of the most frightening forms of invisible causation. A person can be healthy one day and dangerously sick the next with no visible wound. Some treatments used by prehistoric people may have had genuine pharmacological effects. Plants can reduce pain, inflammation, fever, or digestive problems. Others can produce powerful changes in perception, without modern biochemical explanations. Healing and ritual could easily become intertwined. A healer performs a procedure, chants, applies a plant, manipulates the body, or conducts a ceremony. The patient recovers. Whether recovery comes from the treatment, immune response, placebo effects, natural disease progression, or chance, the association between ritual action and survival becomes memorable. Successful healers gain authority. Their techniques are copied and transmitted. Occasionally, failure strengthens rather than destroys belief. The illness may be blamed on an unusually powerful spirit, an incorrect ritual, broken social rules, or hidden hostility. Humans are skilled at constructing explanations that preserve meaningful systems even when outcomes vary. Over time, such practices can create traditions larger than any individual experience. One person's dream becomes a story becomes a repeated ritual becomes an inherited rule. Children grow up learning that certain places, animals, gestures, or objects are dangerous or sacred before they ever personally experience the events that created those associations. At that point, religion no longer depends only on private experiences, it becomes culture. And once invisible beings are shared by a group, they can become anchored to physical locations. A cave where visions occur may remain important after the original participants die. A spring associated with healing can attract repeated visits. A mountain visible for many days of travel can become a landmark, not only in geography but in memory. A grove, unusual rock, waterfall, or animal migration route can gather stories over generations. The unseen world begins attaching itself to the landscape. Before humans raise sacred buildings, they may first discover sacred places. A sacred place does not need walls. It does not need a roof, an altar, or an image of a god. It may begin as a bend in a river where something memorable once happened, a spring that never seems to run dry, a mountain visible from every direction, a tree struck by lightning and somehow still alive, or a cave whose darkness feels different from ordinary night. Long before architecture separates sacred space from everyday space, human beings are already living in landscapes filled with locations that demand attention. For mobile hunter-gatherers, landscape is not empty geography. It is memory made visible. A valley contains the place where animals cross in autumn. A cliff marks a dangerous route. A patch of trees signals water. A cave offers shelter during winter. A particular ridge may be associated with a death, a birth, a successful hunt, or an event remembered through generations. Over time, practical knowledge and symbolic meaning can become inseparable. This matters because sacred geography may be older than formal religion. A place becomes important because people repeatedly return to it, tell stories about it, deposit objects there, bury the dead nearby, paint its surfaces, or avoid it under certain conditions. Archaeologists rarely recover the story, but they can sometimes recover the repetition. Deep caves provide one of the clearest examples. Some decorated caves in Ice Age Europe were not ordinary living spaces. Their interiors could be cold, difficult to access, and completely dark beyond the entrance. Yet people repeatedly travelled far inside them carrying lamps, torches, pigments, tools, and sometimes children or adolescents whose footprints remain preserved in soft ground. The effort itself is significant. At Rouffignac Cave in France, for example, prehistoric visitors travelled through extensive underground passages where hundreds of mammoth images were eventually created. At Niaux, Chauvet, and other sites, art appears in deep chambers that require deliberate journeys into darkness. Some galleries contain concentrations of images while long stretches of wall remain untouched. Why particular surfaces were selected remains uncertain. One possibility is that natural features guided the artists. A crack in stone might resemble the back of an animal. A bulge could become a shoulder. The curved ceiling of a chamber might enhance the form of a painted bison. In flickering light, these shapes can seem to move. The painter is not always imposing an image onto blank rock. Sometimes the rock itself appears to suggest the creature. This interaction between natural form and imagined presence may reveal something important. Sacred places are often not created from nothing. They are discovered through interpretation. A mountain already towers above the horizon before anyone considers it sacred. A spring already emerges mysteriously from the ground before stories gather around it. A cave already leads into darkness before people decide that darkness is meaningful. Human minds excel at attaching significance to unusual features. Rare events are remembered more strongly than the ordinary ones. A solitary stone standing in an open plain attracts attention. A tree with an unusual shape becomes a landmark. A place where echoes behave strangely may feel inhabited by another presence. When experiences at such locations are repeated and shared, a geography of meaning develops. Sound may have contributed more than is obvious from surviving archaeology. Researchers studying some decorated caves have noticed that areas with strong echoes or unusual acoustics sometimes correspond with concentrations of imagery. The relationship is not universal, and scholars still debate how important acoustics were, but the possibility is striking. In total darkness, sound becomes a way of mapping space. A clap, chant, or drum beat can make an invisible chamber answer back. Without knowledge of acoustic physics, an echo can easily seem like a response. It comes from somewhere unseen. It repeats a human sound, but not quite naturally, in a cavern whose walls already contain painted animals. Such effects may have reinforced the sense that the place itself possessed agency. The same principle could apply outside caves. Thunder rolling through mountains, water emerging from rock, steam rising from geothermal ground, or strange lights in the sky can transform ordinary locations into places that seem connected to forces beyond daily life. Later religions repeatedly build myths around such environments. Springs become healing places, peaks become homes of gods, rivers become divine beings, groves become protected, caves become entrances to other worlds. It would be wrong to assume that every prehistoric spring or cave had religious meaning. Most left no evidence at all, and practical uses often overlap with symbolic ones. People need water whether or not it is sacred. Caves can provide shelter and raw materials. Mountains can simply be landmarks. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet one of the most persistent patterns in human history is the tendency to distinguish ordinary space from extraordinary space. Once a place acquires special status, behavior around it changes. People may approach it differently, restrict access, leave offerings, perform ceremonies, or associate it with certain times of year. These practices turn geography into ritual. The deposit of objects is especially important. Across later prehistory, valuable items are often found in rivers, bogs, caves, lakes, and unusual natural settings. Many belong to periods much later than the Paleolithic, but they show how durable the practice can become. Weapons, ornaments, tools, food, animal remains, and human remains may be intentionally placed in environments where retrieval is difficult or impossible. Economically, destroying or abandoning useful objects seems irrational. Symbolically, it can make perfect sense. An offering demonstrates commitment because it costs something. A polished axe thrown into deep water cannot be reused. Food placed in a grave cannot feed the living. Hours of labor spent carving an object that is then hidden in a cave appear wasteful only if survival is measured purely in calories and tools. Human societies rarely operate that way. People invest resources in funerals, gifts, festivals, monuments, symbols, and ceremonies because social meaning also affects survival. Reputation matters, alliance matters, shared identity matters, trust matters. A costly ritual can communicate loyalty more convincingly than a cheap one. This helps explain why sacred places can become centers of group identity. If several families travel periodically to the same location, they do more than perform a ceremony. They exchange information, find partners, share food, renew alliances, settle disputes, and remember common stories. The sacred site becomes a social anchor. Seasonal gathering sites may have been particularly important among hunter-gatherers. Small groups often disperse when food is scarce and gather when resources become abundant. During these larger meetings, rituals could help coordinate people who do not live together year-round. Archaeological evidence from some Upper Paleolithic sites suggests periodic aggregation of larger populations. Large quantities of animal remains, specialized craft activity, unusual objects transported over long distances, and dense occupation layers can indicate gatherings that exceeded ordinary household scale. Whether religion caused these gatherings or simply became part of them is difficult to know. But gathering changes belief. A private dream is personal. A ceremony performed by 50 people becomes public. A story repeated across several families becomes collective memory. A special place visited for generations becomes something closer to an institution. At that point, tradition begins to exist beyond any single individual. This may be one reason certain natural places remain significant for centuries or even millennia. New generations inherit stories whose origins they no longer remember. A ritual may continue after the event that inspired it has been forgotten. A rock, cave, spring, or hill becomes sacred because it has always been treated that way. The authority of the past strengthens the authority of the place. This is also where sacred landscapes begin shaping territorial identity. People can belong not merely to a family but to a network of places. Burial grounds connect ancestors to land. Repeated ceremonies establish claims of memory. A group's history becomes embedded in geography. Among mobile populations, such attachment does not necessarily imply permanent ownership in the later agricultural sense. Territories can overlap. Rights of access may be seasonal. Boundaries may be flexible. But meaning can still be geographically specific. A particular animal migration route belongs to a story. A water source belongs to inherited knowledge. A ceremonial site connects scattered groups who recognize the same symbols. The landscape becomes socially organized. And religion becomes harder to separate from survival. A ceremony performed at the beginning of a seasonal hunt may reinforce ecological knowledge. Restrictions around certain animals can shape hunting behavior. Sacred rules concerning water or groves may unintentionally protect resources. Ritual gatherings can support marriage networks, trade, information exchange, and conflict reduction. This does not mean religion evolved because it was secretly an environmental management system. Such explanations are too simple. Many rituals are costly, dangerous, or ecologically neutral. Beliefs do not need to be practically efficient to persist. Yet religious practices can acquire practical consequences even when those consequences are not their original purpose. As communities return to sacred places, they also begin to synchronize behavior. People moved together, sing together, eat together, grieve together, and perform repeated actions according to shared expectations. Neuroscience and psychology now show that synchronized activity can intensify feelings of social connection. Marching, dancing, chanting, and coordinated movement can make participants feel more unified. Prehistoric people did not need to understand that mechanism scientifically. They only needed to experience it. A night of ceremony around a fire can make unrelated families feel part of something larger. Shared danger can strengthen solidarity. A costly journey to a distant sacred site can create commitment. Communal burial can connect living people through shared ancestors. The gods themselves may still be vague at this stage. There may be spirits, ancestors, animal beings, forces, or presences rather than clearly defined deities. But the social structure required for organized religion is beginning to form. Belief is no longer simply something that happens inside one mind. It is something people do together. And once ritual becomes a reliable way to bind groups together, religion acquires a new power. It can help strangers cooperate, transform memory into identity, and turn scattered individuals into communities that imagine themselves as part of the same invisible order. When a group of people performs the same act at the same time, something changes between them. Bodies begin moving to a common rhythm. Attention narrows toward the same object. Sound, fire, animal, ancestor, or place. Fear becomes shared, relief becomes shared, grief becomes shared. Even without formal doctrine, coordinated ritual can create the powerful sensation that the group is more than a collection of individuals. For small prehistoric communities scattered across difficult landscapes, that feeling may have been enormously important. Religion may have helped explain an uncertain world, but ritual could also help make human groups hold together inside it. The social power of ritual becomes clearer when considering how demanding prehistoric cooperation actually is. Human survival depends on other people to an unusual degree. Hunting large animals may require coordination. Children remain dependent for years. Injured individuals need help. Food is often shared because one person's success can compensate for another person's failure. Knowledge about water, seasons, plants, predators, and routes must pass from older generations to younger ones. A group unable to trust its members becomes fragile very quickly. Yet trust is difficult because people can lie, steal, abandon obligations, or take benefits without contributing. This creates a problem that appears in every cooperative society. How does a group know who is genuinely committed? Ritual can provide part of the answer. A belief that costs nothing is easy to pretend. A public ceremony that requires time, effort, pain, fasting, valuable food, dangerous travel, or the destruction of useful objects is harder to fake repeatedly. Anthropologists sometimes describe these practices as costly signals. The idea is not that prehistoric worshippers consciously calculate social economics before performing rituals. Instead, costly participation can unintentionally make commitment visible. Someone who travels for days to attend a seasonal gathering demonstrates investment in the community. A family that sacrifices valuable food during a ceremony shows that it accepts shared obligations. A person who undergoes an initiation involving discomfort or risk cannot simply claim membership without consequence. The greater the cost, the more convincing the signal may become. This helps explain a pattern that otherwise appears irrational. Religious behavior frequently consumes resources. Animals are killed without being eaten entirely. Valuable objects are buried, burned, broken, or thrown into water. People construct monuments requiring enormous labor. Participants fast when food is available. They give away wealth. They travel long distances to places with little economic value. If religion were only about individual survival, much of this behavior would seem wasteful. But if ritual also builds trust, hierarchy, identity, and cooperation, those costs can become socially productive. Feasting offers a particularly revealing example. Archaeological sites from many periods preserve evidence of unusually large food consumption, often involving specific animals, drinking vessels, cooking facilities, or concentrations of bones. Some feasts are clearly associated with later religious ceremonies, burials, monuments, or political events. In deep prehistory, interpretation is harder, but communal eating likely played a role in gatherings long before written religion existed. Sharing food is one of the simplest ways to turn biological necessity into social obligation. A successful hunter who distributes meat creates relationships. A household that provides food during a communal event gains reputation. Guests become indebted. Alliances are renewed. Marriage arrangements may emerge. Disputes can be negotiated. When feasting is tied to sacred stories or seasonal ceremonies, these social functions become wrapped in a larger system of meaning. People do not simply eat together, they eat at the correct place, at the correct time. perhaps after particular actions has been performed, the meal becomes part of an inherited order. Rhythm adds another layer. Humans have a remarkable capacity for synchronized movement. Clapping, dancing, chanting, marching, and repetitive work songs allow bodies to coordinate with precision. Experiments in modern psychology suggest that people who move synchronously can feel greater affiliation and may behave more cooperatively afterward. The effect is not magical. Shared rhythm reduces the sense of separation between participants. Prehistoric instruments demonstrate that music itself is ancient. Bone flutes from Ice Age Europe are more than 35,000 years old, and musical behavior may reach much farther back than preserved instruments indicate. Drums made from skin or wood would rarely survive archaeologically. Singing leaves no fossil. Hands striking stone, wood, or the body require no artifact at all. A nighttime gathering therefore may have sounded far richer than the silent archaeological record suggests. Voices repeat a pattern. Feet strike the ground. Firelight moves across faces. The same motions are performed by parents, children, elders, and visitors. A shared emotional state develops. Such ceremonies can make beliefs feel true through experience rather than argument. Religion is often described in terms of doctrines, but prehistoric religion probably depends much more on participation. People need not possess elaborate theological systems to feel that a ceremony has changed something. The experience itself can become evidence. Ritual also creates memory because unusual actions are easier to remember than ordinary ones. A child may forget hundreds of normal evenings, but remember the first journey to a distant cave, the first time the community painted bodies with pigment, or the first ceremony involving the bones of an ancestor. Repetition then reinforces the memory until the ritual feels inevitable. This is one way traditions acquire authority. No individual needs to know why the practice began. People perform it because older people perform it, and those older people learned it from those before them. Over several generations, the origin may disappear entirely, the ritual remains. The effect can be powerful because repetition converts choice into expectation. An optional act gradually becomes the proper act. Failure to perform it can then feel dangerous, disrespectful, or socially unacceptable. This creates another possible bridge from ritual to supernatural morality. At first, a ceremony may be associated with practical success, ancestral respect, or group identity. Later, violating it may be interpreted as inviting punishment. A failed hunt after a neglected ceremony becomes meaningful. Illness after breaking a taboo becomes evidence. Misfortune can reinforce the idea that invisible beings monitor human conduct. Scholars still debate when beliefs in morally concerned supernatural agents become important in human evolution. Many small-scale societies have spirits or gods who care more about ritual, territory, or specific taboos than about universal morality. The idea of gods who monitor every person's ethical behavior appears much more strongly in some larger, later societies. But the basic social mechanism can begin earlier. Ancestors may care whether descendants maintain customs. Spirits may punish disrespect. Certain animals may be forbidden under particular conditions. Breaking rules becomes dangerous not only because living people disapprove, but because unseen agents might also respond. This dramatically expands social surveillance. A person can hide an action from other humans. Hiding it from a spirit is harder if the spirit is believed to see what humans cannot. Once supernatural agents become associated with rules, they can strengthen norms even when no human witness is present. Yet religion is not simply an ancient police system. Many rituals focus on healing, mourning, fertility, weather, hunting, protection, gratitude, or contact with ancestors rather than punishment. Some supernatural beings are unreliable or morally ambiguous. Others are dangerous despite correct behavior. No single explanation fully accounts for the diversity of religion. The stronger argument is that religious systems can perform several functions at once. A ceremony may reduce anxiety, reinforce identity, preserve ecological knowledge, display commitment, legitimize leadership, connect generations, and create emotionally intense experiences. Its survival does not depend on one purpose. Ritual can even reshape the boundaries of the group itself. People who share the same ceremonies may begin to regard one another as fundamentally connected, even when they are not close relatives. Symbols become markers of belonging, body decoration, ornaments, burial practices, and styles of artifacts can distinguish one community from another. This matters because Homo sapiens increasingly form social networks extending beyond immediate families. Archaeological evidence shows raw materials traveling across large distances during the Paleolithic, shells, pigments, stone, and ornaments move between regions, suggesting exchange networks that connect groups over surprisingly wide territories. Religion may have helped maintain these larger networks by providing shared stories and rituals. A person arriving from another camp but carrying familiar symbols is not entirely a stranger. A common ceremonial place creates a relationship between groups that rarely meet. Shared sacred traditions can turn geography into community. The social advantages are obvious, but there is a darker side. The same rituals that create belonging can define outsiders. Shared gods can unite one group while distinguishing it from another. Sacred territory can become contested territory. Religious authority can become political authority. Specialists who control access to ceremonies, ancestral knowledge, or sacred objects may acquire influence. In small mobile societies, power may remain limited by the ability of people to leave or resist domination, but that balance begins to change after the Ice Age. Around the end of the Pleistocene, climates shift, populations grow in some regions, and certain communities spend longer periods in the same places. Wild grains are harvested intensively. Houses become more permanent. Storage becomes important. Cemeteries become tied to settlements. Eventually, plants and animals are domesticated. For perhaps the first time on a large scale, humans begin living among hundreds or even thousands of people who cannot simply scatter whenever tensions rise. The old religious tools of memory, ritual, ancestor, sacred place, and group identity enter an entirely new social environment. And there, religion begins to change shape. The world begins to settle, but human life does not suddenly become easier. In many places after the last Ice Age, people who once moved regularly across wide territories begin spending longer periods in the same locations. Camps become villages. Storage pits appear. Houses are rebuilt on the same ground. Wild grains are gathered more intensively, then cultivated. Animals that once lived beyond the edge of camp begin to be managed, bred, and eventually domesticated. These changes unfold slowly and unevenly, over thousands of years, but together they create one of the greatest transformations in human history. The old spiritual world of ancestors, animals, sacred places, dreams, and ritual does not disappear. Instead, it enters a new kind of society, one where land, food, memory, ownership, and social pressure become more tightly bound together than ever before. The transition to agriculture is often described as a revolution, but for the people living through it, there is no single moment when one way of life ends and another begins. In the Near East, communities associated with the Natufian culture were already living in relatively permanent settlements before full agriculture took hold. They gathered wild cereals, hunted gazelle, built substantial structures, and buried their dead near or within settlements. Some communities returned to the same places for generations. This matters because permanent settlement changes the meaning of both land and ancestry. A mobile group can leave a place when resources fail, conflict intensifies, or memories become painful. A farming village cannot move so easily. Fields must be tended. Stored grain must be protected. Houses require labor. Water sources matter. Animal herds become property. The dead are buried close to homes. Each generation inherits not only stories but physical claims upon a landscape altered by previous generations. This creates opportunity but also tension. Stored food can support larger populations and help people survive seasonal shortages. It can also be stolen. Fields create recognizable investments of labor. Herds can be counted. Houses can be inherited. Some families accumulate more than others. Population density increases. Neighbors cannot always be avoided. Disease spreads more easily where humans, waste, and domesticated animals concentrate in permanent settlements. For many early agricultural communities, health may actually worsen in certain respects. Skeletal evidence from different regions often shows increased dental problems, nutritional stress, infectious disease, and physical strain after heavy dependence on agriculture, though the pattern varies by place and period. Farming eventually supports much larger populations, but the first farmers are not simply entering a comfortable new world of abundance. They are entering a world of dependence. A hunter can respond to local scarcity by moving toward another resource zone if social and environmental conditions allow. A farmer who has invested months in a crop waits for rain. If the rains fail, the field fails with them. If insects arrive, stored grain can disappear. If a herd contracts disease, years of accumulated wealth may die within days. This new dependence on seasonal cycles may intensify ritual attention to forces humans cannot control. Rain, fertility, soil, animal reproduction, and the timing of harvest become matters of collective survival. A successful year can fill storage rooms. A failed year can threaten an entire village. The agricultural calendar also gives time a stronger recurring structure. Planting happens at the right season. Harvest follows. Animals mate, give birth, and are culled according to cycles. Solar and lunar observations become increasingly useful. Repeated seasonal ceremonies can emerge around these patterns, linking practical timing with symbolic meaning. Again, religion should not be reduced to an attempt to control weather. The evidence remains incomplete, and early farming communities likely held beliefs far more complex than any single explanation suggests. But agriculture creates conditions in which collective ritual can become increasingly tied to recurring natural cycles. Architecture reflects this change. In settled communities, ritual no longer has to occur only at temporary gathering places or natural landmarks. A structure can be rebuilt in the same location generation after generation. Certain rooms can become associated with communal events. Floors can contain burials. Walls can hold images. Benches, platforms, installations, and deposits can accumulate histories. At Çatalhöyük in central Anatolia, Occupied beginning in the 7th millennium BCE, houses were packed closely together in a dense settlement where people moved across rooftops and entered many buildings from above. Some rooms contain elaborate wall paintings, animal horns, plastered features, and burials beneath floors. Earlier researchers sometimes called particularly decorated rooms shrines, but later interpretations have been more cautious, emphasizing that domestic and ritual activities may not have been sharply separated. That distinction is important. Modern societies often imagine religion as something that occurs in a special building separate from ordinary life. Early settled communities may not have divided experience that way. The house can be a place for sleeping, eating, storing food, burying relatives, displaying symbolic objects, and performing rituals all at once. The sacred enters domestic space. This is profound development because permanence allows symbolic practices to accumulate physically. A family may live above ancestors buried beneath the floor. A wall can be replastered repeatedly, preserving traces of earlier decoration underneath. Animal remains can be incorporated into architecture. A building becomes layered with the actions of people who lived there before. Memory stops being only oral. It becomes architectural. The settlement itself can now function as a map of ancestry. Children grow up in structures built by parents and grandparents. Graves remain physically nearby. Certain houses may gain prestige through their association with particular lineages or events. People can point to a place and say, in effect, that their dead are here and their history is here. This may strengthen concepts of inherited belonging. Property and ancestry can become mutually reinforcing. If a family claims a field because its ancestors worked it, then the dead provide legitimacy. If ancestors are believed to remain connected with descendants, neglecting them may become both spiritually dangerous and socially unacceptable. Religion begins to participate in claims about who belongs where. The social consequences grow as villages become larger. Face-to-face trust works well within small groups where everyone knows everyone else. In a settlement containing hundreds of people, social relationships become more complicated. Disputes over storage, marriage, inheritance, livestock, labor, and access to resources require mechanisms for negotiation. Ritual can help by providing shared identity across households. A communal ceremony reminds competing families that they belong to something larger. Seasonal feasts redistribute food. Ancestor traditions connect living households to a common past. Shared buildings create places where collective decisions or ceremonies can occur. Religious specialists may gain influence because they coordinate rituals affecting the whole settlement. But specialization also creates inequality. Someone who controls access to sacred knowledge can acquire status. A lineage associated with important ancestors may claim greater authority. A family that provides large feasts can turn surplus food into prestige. Ritual leadership and economic power can reinforce one another. Not every early village becomes hierarchical. Some communities appear remarkably resistant to centralized authority. Large settlements can exist without obvious palaces, kings, or extreme wealth differences. Social organization varies dramatically. Scholars still debate how egalitarian many early farming communities truly were, especially because inequality can leave subtle archaeological traces. Yet the possibility of accumulated wealth changes the stakes. When food can be stored, surplus exists in a visible form. When animals are owned, wealth can reproduce biologically. When land is improved, investment becomes fixed in place. When inheritance matters, ancestry becomes politically significant. The dead can now support the claims of the living. This relationship between ancestors and property appears repeatedly in later agricultural societies. Burial places become markers of lineage, genealogies justify leadership, founding ancestors legitimize territorial rights. Eventually, kings will claim descent from gods themselves. But that development lies far ahead. At first, the transformation may be quieter. A skull is removed from a grave, a face is reconstructed in plaster. A relative buried beneath a floor remains part of a household life. A ceremony renews the connection between living people, dead ancestors, and the soil supporting them both. Meanwhile, larger communities require larger gatherings. Some sites begin to reveal architecture that appears difficult to explain through domestic life alone. Massive stone features are erected before the emergence of full urban civilization. People gather from surrounding regions. Wild animals dominate carved imagery. Feasting occurs on a scale that suggests cooperation far beyond one household. The old assumption was that agriculture came first, producing surplus settlement and only then monumental religion. But one extraordinary prehistoric site forced archaeologists to reconsider that sequence. On a hill in southeastern Anatolia, people began raising enormous carved stone pillars at a time when farming itself was only beginning to emerge. The place would become known as Göbekli Tepe, and it would raise an unsettling possibility perhaps humans did not build temples because they had already created civilization. Perhaps gathering for ritual helped create civilization in the first place. On a limestone ridge in southeastern Anatolia, long before the first cities rise in Mesopotamia, people begin moving enormous stones. They cut pillars from the bedrock, shape them into tall T-like forms, carve their surfaces with animals, and arrange them inside circular or oval enclosures. Some of the stones weigh many tons. There are no bronze tools, no wheeled carts, no written instructions, and no obvious palace commanding the labour. The builders are living near the beginning of the transition from hunting and gathering toward farming. Yet they create a monumental place on a scale that earlier theories once associated with much later agricultural societies. The site is Göbekli Tepe. Its discovery did not prove that religion created civilization, despite the dramatic way that idea has sometimes been presented. But it did force archaeologists to reconsider a simpler model in which farming produces surplus. Surplus produces villages. Villages produce social hierarchy, and only then do humans acquire the resources necessary for monumental ritual. At Göbekli Tepe, major communal construction appears surprisingly early, during the 10th and 9th millennia BCE, when subsistence in the region still depended heavily on wild plants and animals. That sequence matters. The largest early enclosures contain massive central pillars surrounded by smaller ones. Many pillars carry relief carvings of foxes, snakes, wild boar, birds, aurochs, gazelles, insects, and other creatures. Some appear abstract at first glance, but closer inspection reveals arms and hands carved along the sides of certain pillars. This strongly suggests that at least some T-shaped stones represent highly stylized human or human-like figures. Their faces, however, are absent. The result is eerie even without projecting modern ideas onto it. Tall stone bodies stand in a ring while dangerous animals seem to move across their surfaces. Some carvings emphasize predators, scavengers, and creatures associated with danger. Others combine animals with symbols whose meanings have disappeared completely. No surviving myth explains them. Scholars still debate what the enclosures represented. They may have hosted ceremonies, feasts, communal meetings, rites connected with death, social alliances, or activities that combined several of these functions. Calling Göbekli Tepe a temple is convenient but potentially misleading because the word carries assumptions drawn from later religions. There is no evidence that its builders worshipped gods resembling those of historical Mesopotamia. There are no texts named deities, priestly archives, or clear altars identifying the site as a temple in the later sense. What survives in the record suggests something more basic and perhaps more interesting. Large groups of people repeatedly gathered to build and use highly symbolic communal structures. The labor alone is significant. Quarrying, shaping, transporting, and raising large pillars requires coordination. Groups must agree on where construction will occur. Workers need food. Skilled individuals must understand stone. Tasks must be organized. People from more than one household are probably involved. Why make that investment? The answer cannot be recovered with certainty, but the site reveals that symbolic projects can motivate substantial cooperation before urban states exist. Human beings are willing to spend enormous amounts of energy on places that cannot be explained simply as houses, storage rooms, or fortifications. This changes the old story. For much of 20th century archaeology, one influential assumption held that economic change came first. Agriculture created reliable food surpluses. Surplus freed some individuals from food production. Specialists and priests then emerged. Finally, organized religion gained monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe suggests that the relationship may have been more reciprocal. Ritual gatherings could themselves encourage economic intensification. If hundreds of people assemble periodically, feeding them becomes a logistical challenge. Large quantities of wild grain must be gathered and processed. Animals must be hunted, water must be secured. Food preparation has to occur on a scale larger than an ordinary household. At Göbekli Tepe and related sites, archaeologists have found evidence consistent with large-scale food processing and communal consumption. Stone vessels, grinding equipment, and animal bones indicate substantial eating activity. Although scholars continue debating the exact character of feasting there, wild gazelle and other animals formed important parts of the diet. A gathering can therefore generate pressure to produce more food. This does not mean that people invented farming to feed temple builders. That claim goes beyond the evidence. Plant domestication was a long process influenced by climate, population, local ecology, human experimentation, and changing settlement patterns. No single site explains the origin of agriculture, but ritual congregation may have been one factor within that larger transformation. The chronology makes the possibility especially intriguing because southeastern Anatolia and the northern Fertile Crescent lie near important early centers of plant and animal domestication. Wild ancestors of wheat grow in the wider region. Human communities there were already intensifying their use of cereals and experimenting with new subsistence strategies. Imagine the feedback loop. People gather because a place has ritual significance. Gathering requires food. Larger food demands encourage more intensive harvesting and storage. Reliable food supplies make longer settlement possible. Settlement allows more elaborate structures and more frequent ceremonies. Ritual then strengthens alliances among groups whose economic relationships are becoming increasingly interconnected. Religion and subsistence do not need to compete as explanations. They can reshape one another. Another important feature of Göbekli Tepe is what it says about cooperation among people who may not have lived together permanently. Monumental ritual spaces can create social networks larger than individual settlements. Different groups may contribute labor, food, and knowledge. Ceremonies provide opportunities for exchange, marriage, information sharing, and conflict management. This echoes the earlier role of sacred gathering places, but the scale has changed dramatically. Stone architecture makes the gathering permanent. A story told around a seasonal campfire disappears when people leave. A pillar weighing 10 tons remains. Children can return years later and see what earlier generations built. The monument becomes material memory, capable of outliving the people who created it. This permanence can transform authority. Those who know the correct ritual, stories, or building traditions may gain prestige. Certain groups may claim stronger connections to the site. Repeated ceremonies can generate inherited roles. Whether Göbekli Tepe had formal priests is unknown, and claims of a developed priestly class are speculative. Yet complex ritual coordination creates opportunities for specialist knowledge to become socially important. The carvings also reveal how different this religious world may have been from later agricultural religion. Domesticated plants and animals do not dominate the imagery. Wild creatures do. Foxes, snakes, boars, vultures, and other animals occupy the stone surfaces. The world represented here still looks deeply connected to hunting landscapes, rather than to fields of grain and herds of domesticated livestock. It is a reminder that large-scale ritual did not wait for humans to place themselves completely above the wild environment. One particularly fascinating theme involves vultures. These birds appear in imagery at Göbekli Tepe and at other Neolithic sites in the broader region. Vultures are scavengers that consume dead bodies, and in some later Near Eastern traditions, birds play roles in funerary symbolism. At the Neolithic settlement of Çatalhöyük, wall art has also been interpreted as depicting vultures interacting with headless human bodies, although interpretations remain disputed. This has led researchers to wonder whether excarnation, in which bodies are exposed so flesh can be removed before bones receive further treatment, formed part of certain early ritual systems. Human bone fragments from Göbekli Tepe showing modifications have added interest to this possibility, but the evidence is limited and cannot establish a single funerary practice for the site. Even so, death seems never far from the symbolic world. Predators, scavengers, headless figures, ancestors, dangerous animals, and monumental anthropomorphic pillars inhabit a landscape where humans are beginning to settle, but have not yet created the familiar gods of civilization. Göbekli Tepe therefore does not provide the birthplace of religion. Religion is clearly older. What it provides is evidence for a turning point in scale. Belief and ritual can now mobilize enough people to alter landscapes permanently. Shared symbolic worlds can organize labor. Sacred places can become monumental centers. The invisible begins producing enormous visible structures. And then, after centuries of use, something equally strange happens. Many of Göbekli Tepe's early enclosures were deliberately filled in. Pillars disappeared beneath debris. Newer structures were built. Meanings changed. The place evolved rather than remaining frozen in a single tradition. That transformation is itself revealing. Religion is not a fixed invention passed unchanged from prehistoric ancestors. It mutates as human society changes. As communities become increasingly settled, the focus of sacred life moves closer to home. The wild animals carved into communal stone do not vanish entirely, but another force becomes more powerful ancestry. The dead are no longer only remembered in distant caves or graves. In some early villages, they begin living beneath the floors. Beneath the floor of a house, the dead remain close, people sleep above them, prepare food nearby, raise children in rooms where earlier generations have been buried, and sometimes reopen graves long after the body has decomposed. In several early farming communities of the Near East, the boundary between a house and a cemetery becomes strangely thin. Death is no longer always removed to a distant place. The ancestors occupy the same physical landscape as the living, and in some settlements their skulls are eventually brought back into the world above ground. One of the most striking examples comes from the ancient settlement of Jericho. Thousands of years before the biblical city familiar from much later traditions, people were already living there in substantial communities. During the pre-pottery Neolithic, beginning roughly 10,000 years ago, inhabitants buried some of their dead beneath houses and other parts of the settlement. In certain cases, skulls were later removed from graves and carefully transformed. Clay or plaster was modelled over the bone to reconstruct facial features. Eyes could be represented with shells. The result was neither simply a skull nor an ordinary sculpture. It was the physical remains of a real human being given a new face. Similar plastered skulls have been found at several Neolithic sites in the Levant, including Ain Ghazal and Tel Ramad. They vary in style and treatment, suggesting that there was no single standardized ritual. Some appear highly individualized, while others are more schematic. Their exact meaning remains uncertain. They're frequently interpreted in connection with ancestor veneration, but scholars still debate whether every skull actually represented a revered ancestor. Some may have belonged to enemies, socially important individuals, ritual figures, or categories that cannot easily be reconstructed from archaeological evidence. Even so, the practice reveals a remarkable relationship with human remains. Someone waits until decomposition has progressed far enough to retrieve a skull. Someone cleans it. Someone applies plaster. Someone shapes a nose, cheeks, and other features. The dead person's physical identity is deliberately reconstructed rather than allowed to disappear into the earth. Death has become a process rather than a single event. This is important because many modern societies treat burial as the final separation between the living and the dead. Once a funeral ends, the body is expected to remain undisturbed, but that expectation is culturally specific. In many societies across history, funerary rituals unfold in stages. Bodies may be exposed, buried temporarily, exhumed, cleaned, moved, cremated, divided, or placed in collective repositories. Bones can remain socially active objects. Early Neolithic communities appear to have practiced similarly complex relationships with the dead. At Çatalhöyük, people were buried beneath house platforms, sometimes in spaces used repeatedly for interment. Graves could be reopened to add another individual. In some cases, skulls were removed. Human remains therefore participated in the continuing history of buildings. The significance may extend beyond grief. When humans become sedentary, ancestry acquires a new political dimension. A mobile community can carry stories of ancestors wherever it travels. A farming community can physically anchor those ancestors to land. The burial beneath a house creates a tangible connection between the living household and previous generations who occupied the same place. That connection can become a claim. The family belongs here because its dead are here. There is no evidence that every Neolithic burial was consciously used as a property deed, and it would be misleading to reduce ancestor ritual to economics. Kinship, affection, identity, cosmology, and mourning may all have mattered. But as land and buildings become more valuable, memory and ownership can reinforce each other. The ancestors provide depth to social identity. This may help explain why early farming societies sometimes devote extraordinary effort to the dead even when living conditions are difficult. A deceased person is no longer merely an individual who has stopped breathing. The person can become a link in a chain connecting generations. Over time, remembered ancestors can become something more than remembered humans. Stories change as they are transmitted. A respected founder becomes increasingly important. Achievements grow in retelling. Genealogies stretch backward beyond living memory. Real individuals merge with legendary figures. Eventually, the distinction between ancestor, culture hero, spirit, and deity can become difficult to draw. This process is documented much more clearly in later historical societies. Kings become divine after death. Founders receive cults. Legendary ancestors acquire supernatural powers. Entire communities claim descent from beings who occupy the boundary between human and divine. The origins of such transformations may be much older. A community does not need to decide deliberately to invent a god. It only needs to preserve a powerful figure in collective memory long enough for memory to become mythology. The same transformation can occur with places. A house associated with important ancestors gains unusual status. A burial area becomes sacred. A settlement founded generations earlier acquires stories explaining why it exists. The landscape becomes populated not merely by the dead, but by founding beings whose actions explain the present world. Religion, therefore, becomes a mechanism for connecting time. The living inherit obligations from the past and pass them toward the future. Ritual makes those obligations visible. A ceremony performed because ancestors performed it carries a different authority from an innovation proposed yesterday. Tradition gives behavior legitimacy precisely because its origin lies beyond immediate memory. This creates an important psychological shift. The invisible beings imagined by humans are no longer only unpredictable spirits encountered in dreams or wild landscapes. Some are becoming socially structured beings with relationships to specific families, houses, territories, and communities. They have histories. They may also have expectations. An ancestor who once protected descendants can become a supernatural guardian. An offended ancestor can become a source of illness or misfortune. Offerings maintain relationships between living and dead. Proper burial becomes necessary not only because grief demands it, but because an improperly treated dead person may remain dangerous. Such beliefs are widespread in later cultures, though prehistoric archaeology cannot establish precisely which versions existed in early villages. What survives suggests that the dead were repeatedly treated as more than biological remains. The house itself may become cosmological. Floors contain ancestors, walls carry animal imagery, roofs open toward the sky, hearths maintain fire. Storage rooms contain the harvest produced by surrounding land. Birth, food, death, memory, and ritual occupy the same structure. There may be no clear distinction between domestic life and religion because religion has not yet become a separate institution. That distinction matters when asking why humans invented gods. The question often imagines someone looking at the sky and deciding that a supernatural creator must exist, but early religion may have emerged through something far more intimate. A dead grandmother beneath the floor may have mattered more than a creator of the universe. A successful harvest may have mattered more than abstract cosmology. A dangerous animal may have carried more sacred significance than the stars. Religion grows outward from relationships people already understand: parent and child, hunter and prey, family and ancestor, community and landscape. As societies expand, those relationships can be projected onto larger supernatural beings. A protective ancestor resembles a leader. A dangerous spirit resembles an enemy. A force controlling rain resembles a provider whose favor must be maintained. Human social categories become templates for supernatural categories. But the archaeological record also reveals another transformation. Images begin to give invisible beings increasingly stable forms. Humans had represented animals for tens of thousands of years, and composite beings such as the Lion Man show that supernatural imagination is ancient. In farming societies, however, symbolic imagery becomes more densely embedded in settlements. Human figures, animals, hybrid forms, exaggerated body features, and recurring symbols appear across pottery, figurines, walls, seals, and architecture. Some objects have traditionally been identified as goddesses or gods, but these labels can be misleading. The famous corpulent female figurines from prehistoric Anatolia, for example, were once confidently interpreted as evidence of a universal mother-goddess religion. That idea became enormously popular. Modern archaeology is far more cautious. Female figurines may represent humans, ancestors, spirits, ideals, teaching objects, household symbols, toys, protective beings, or categories that have no modern equivalent. Their presence does not prove a single prehistoric goddess cult. Context matters, and many figurines are found in ordinary domestic debris rather than formal sanctuaries. This is a useful warning. Modern observers want to give ancient images names. Prehistoric people left no labels. A figure with exaggerated eyes is not automatically a god. A horned animal is not automatically sacred. A woman depicted with prominent breasts is not automatically a fertility goddess. Archaeology can identify patterns, but theology rarely fossilizes. Yet over time, some supernatural figures do become more recognizable and more stable. Symbols repeat. Ritual spaces become formalized. Communities share increasingly elaborate mythic traditions. Animals, humans, ancestors, and forces of nature begin merging into personalities capable of surviving across generations. The invisible world is acquiring characters, and eventually, those characters will receive something that spirits of deep prehistory may never have possessed in a permanent form. They will receive names. Once names can be preserved, repeated, and finally written down, the gods step out of archaeological silence and enter history. But before writing can preserve them, humans must first imagine what those gods look like. Once invisible beings begin to acquire recognizable forms, religion changes again. A spirit tied to a place or ancestor can remain vague, but an image gives it a body, a carved face, a horned figure, a human-animal hybrid, or a recurring symbol allows people to identify the same being across time. The supernatural becomes easier to remember, easier to teach, and eventually easier to organize. Yet the earliest divine forms are rarely simple. They often combine human and animal traits, exaggerate certain features, or blur categories that modern people prefer to keep separate. This ambiguity is not accidental. For prehistoric communities, animals are not merely background creatures. They are competitors, food, danger, guides, seasonal indicators, and beings with abilities humans lack. Some see in darkness, some fly, some survive winter by disappearing underground, some cross distances no human can match, some detect threats before people can. To imagine a being with both human intention and animal power is therefore a natural extension of an already rich symbolic world. The Lion Man carved from mammoth ivory tens of thousands of years earlier shows that humans were capable of such combinations long before agriculture. By the Neolithic and later prehistoric periods, composite imagery becomes more widespread in many regions. Horned figures, bird-like humans, snake imagery, feline forms, and stylized faces appear on walls, vessels, figurines, and carved stone. Their meanings vary enormously, and scholars still debate whether some represent deities, ancestors, ritual performers, mythic beings, or ordinary people depicted symbolically. One persistent mistake in older archaeology was to assume that unusual imagery must represent gods. A figure with outstretched arms became a deity. A female figurine became a fertility goddess. A horned person became a shaman. Such interpretations often reflected modern expectations more than secure evidence. The record is fragmentary, and no single explanation fully accounts for the diversity of these objects. Still, something important is happening. Symbolic forms begin to recur. Repetition matters because repeated imagery creates stability. If the same animal, gesture, symbol, or body type appears across many objects, people may be participating in a shared visual language. That language can preserve meaning beyond a single performance. A story told around a fire is forgotten if no one remembers it. A carved symbol can survive a generation and be recognized by people who never met its maker. This is how supernatural beings can begin to develop identity. A being associated with rain may become linked to particular animals or colors. A protective ancestor may acquire distinctive features. A dangerous spirit may be represented with exaggerated eyes or teeth. Over generations, these associations can become conventional enough that a community recognizes the figure immediately. The divine world grows more legible. At the same time, humans increasingly project social structure onto supernatural beings. This may be one of the most important transitions in the history of religion. Earlier spirits could be diffuse, local, or unpredictable. As societies become more organized, supernatural beings also begin to appear more organized. A village with prominent elders can imagine powerful ancestral figures. A society dependent on herding may emphasize beings associated with animals and fertility. A community facing warfare may elevate protective or aggressive supernatural powers. A settlement relying on seasonal agriculture may become especially concerned with rain, storms, sun, soil, and reproductive cycles. This does not mean that gods are simply reflections of economics. Belief systems can preserve much older imagery long after social conditions change. Religious traditions often accumulate rather than replace. A god may begin as a local storm being, absorb traits from another's deity, become associated with kingship, and later acquire moral authority. The history of gods is frequently layered. The body provides another important template. Humans understand the world through embodied experience. Hunger, sex, childbirth, pain, blood, illness, aging, and death are universal. It is unsurprising that supernatural beings often become associated with these same processes. Fertility, birth, hunting success, disease, protection, and death appear repeatedly in religious traditions because they are among the most consequential experiences humans face. This helps explain the abundance of prehistoric figurines with emphasized sexual or reproductive features, though their meanings remain uncertain. Some may relate to fertility, others may depict specific individuals, ancestors, ideals of health, or ordinary bodies. The evidence does not support a universal prehistoric fertility cult, despite how appealing that idea once seemed. The same caution applies to animals. Bulls, snakes, birds, lions, and other powerful creatures later become associated with specific gods in many historical civilizations. But their prehistoric appearances cannot always be traced directly into later pantheons. Continuity is tempting to assume and often impossible to prove. Still, animals offer a vocabulary of power. A bull embodies strength, a bird crosses between earth and sky, a snake disappears into the ground and sheds its skin. A lion dominates other predators. These qualities can be interpreted symbolically without requiring a fixed theological system. Hybrid forms are especially revealing because they suggest that supernatural power is imagined as crossing boundaries. A being can possess human intelligence and animal strength. It can belong to the earth and sky. It can be male and female, living and dead, ancestor and animal. Religious beings often become compelling precisely because they violate ordinary categories while remaining understandable enough to remember. Cognitive researchers sometimes describe this as minimally counterintuitive thinking. A concept that is entirely ordinary may be forgettable. A concept that violates every expectation may be too confusing. But a mostly familiar being with one or two extraordinary traits is easy to remember. A person who never dies, an ancestor who can see the living, an animal that speaks, a human with wings. Such beings are cognitively sticky. This may help explain why supernatural concepts transmit so effectively. A god is often human-like enough to understand but powerful enough to matter. As these beings become more distinct, names become increasingly important. Names allow stories to connect across generations. They make it possible to distinguish one supernatural agent from another. A storm is no longer merely a dangerous force. It belongs to a particular being with preferences, relationships, and a history. By the time writing appears in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and elsewhere, named deities are already deeply embedded in society. But writing does not create them, it simply makes them visible to historians. The earliest written records often assume that gods already exist. In southern Mesopotamia, deities become associated with specific cities, temples, natural forces, occupations, and political communities. In Egypt, divine beings are tied to animals, landscapes, kingship, the sun, death, fertility, and cosmic order. These systems are already highly developed when texts begin preserving them. The long prehistoric process behind them is mostly lost. What survives suggests that gods did not emerge fully formed. They grew out of older categories' ancestors, animals, forces, places, and social roles. Those categories became personified, combined, stabilized, and passed down. Eventually, a deity can possess a personality. It can have relatives. It can love, fight, punish, protect, create, destroy, become jealous, accept offerings, and favor one community over another. In other words, as gods increasingly resemble humans, but humans enlarge beyond ordinary limits. This anthropomorphism may sound strange, yet it makes supernatural beings socially usable. A force of nature cannot negotiate. A god can. If a god has intentions, then ritual can influence those intentions. Offerings can please. Neglect can offend. Prayer can request. Sacrifice can repay. The relationship becomes reciprocal. Humans give something to the divine, and the divine is expected to respond. This logic appears clearly in many later religious systems, but its roots may lie much earlier in the social instincts humans already use with one another. Gifts create obligations, hospitality creates bonds, loyalty expects protection, Disobedience invites punishment. Religion transforms these ordinary social rules into cosmic relationships. Once that happens, ritual becomes more than communal performance. It becomes negotiation with powerful personalities. A village can ask for rain. A family can ask an ancestor for protection. A ruler can claim the favor of a war god. A harvest can be interpreted as divine approval. A drought can become evidence of anger. This introduces both comfort and danger. A world governed by personalities can be more meaningful than one governed by random forces, but it can also become morally and ritually demanding. If the gods care about human behavior, then disaster is no longer simply disaster. It may be judgment. The leap from spirit to deity is therefore not merely a change in imagery. It changes causation itself. Events become socially interpretable. Floods, victories, illness, fertility, and political success can all be woven into relationships with supernatural beings. And as settlements grow into towns and towns into cities, those relationships become institutional. Gods receive houses of their own. Those houses become temples. Temples gather wealth. Priests emerge as specialists. And religion, once embedded quietly in caves, graves, and households, becomes one of the central organizing forces of civilization. When cities appear, religion becomes visible on a scale that prehistoric ritual never achieved. Mud brick platforms rise above crowded settlements, storehouses fill with grain, specialists record deliveries, offerings, labor, and land. Processions move through streets built for populations far larger than the face-to-face communities of earlier villages. At the center of many of these urban worlds stands a temple, and within that temple is a god understood not merely as a vague spirit or remembered ancestor, but as the onatus, protector, and supernatural authority of the city itself. This transformation is especially clear in Mesopotamia. By the late 4th and early 3rd millennia BCE, cities such as Uruk, Ur, Eridu, and others had become centers of political, economic, and ritual power. Their populations depended on irrigation, agricultural surplus, specialized labor, long-distance trade, and increasingly complex administration. Religion did not sit outside this system. It was woven through it. Temples could control fields, herds, workshops, labor, and stored goods. They employed or supported administrators, craftspeople, herders, and other workers. Offerings flowed inward, and resources flowed outward. In some periods and cities, temple institutions became major economic organizations, though scholars still debate how dominant they were compared with palaces, households, and other institutions. The important point is not that priests suddenly took over civilization. It is that gods became embedded in administration. A deity could possess land. A deity could receive grain. A deity could own livestock. A deity could be represented by officials. This is an extraordinary conceptual development when viewed across the long arc of prehistory. Invisible beings are no longer only encountered in dreams, remembered through ancestors, or approached at sacred places. They become legal and economic actors within human institutions. The god has a household. The temple is that household. Temple personnel feed the divine image, clothe it, clean it, carry it in procession, and provide offerings. These acts may appear symbolic to an outside observer, but within the religious system they express a real relationship. The deity is treated as a powerful social being whose well-being matters to the city. This reflects a broader pattern. As human societies become more hierarchical, the supernatural world often becomes more hierarchical too. Gods resemble rulers. They possess residences, servants, estates, family relationships, and political territories. Human institutions and divine institutions begin mirroring one another. In Mesopotamia, individual cities are often associated with particular patron deities. The city's political fortune can therefore be interpreted through the favor of its god. Victory in war may demonstrate divine support. Defeat may suggest abandonment, anger, or the temporary superiority of another city's deity. This makes warfare theological as well as political. When one city conquers another, people are not simply losing territory. Their divine order may appear to have failed. Conquerors can remove sacred images, seize temple wealth, or incorporate defeated gods into a broader pantheon. Religion becomes a language for explaining the unstable fortunes of states. Yet the gods are not always benevolent. Mesopotamian religious texts often describe humans living in a world where divine intentions can be difficult to predict. A person may perform rituals correctly and still suffer. A city may fall despite devotion. Flood, famine, disease, and warfare remain terrifying because religion does not eliminate uncertainty. Instead, it gives uncertainty personalities. The same process takes different forms elsewhere. In ancient Egypt, religion becomes inseparable from kingship. The pharaoh occupies a unique position between human and divine spheres. Different periods articulate his divinity in different ways. But royal authority is consistently embedded in cosmic order. Egyptian gods are associated with the sun, sky, fertility, death, kingship, animals, and specific regions. Temples become major landholders and institutional centers over time. Priests conduct daily rituals maintaining divine images. Festivals carry gods outside temple precincts, allowing wider communities to participate. The temple is not merely a gathering hall. It is conceived as a sacred residence and, in some cases, a model of cosmic order. Architecture itself communicates theology. Monumental gateways, restricted inner rooms, processional routes, elevated platforms, and carefully controlled access transform movement through space into movement toward increasing sacred intensity. This produces a new form of religious authority. In a small hunter-gatherer community, sacred knowledge can be distributed informally. In a major temple, access can be restricted. Ritual knowledge can become specialized. Calendars, hymns, offerings, purification procedures, and administrative records require trained personnel. Priesthood becomes a profession. This does not mean every priest is part of a unified ruling class. Priestly roles vary widely. Some are temporary, some are hereditary, some are held by elites. Others perform practical administrative work. But religious specialization becomes increasingly institutionalized. Writing intensifies the change. Before writing, myth depends on memory and performance. Once stories, rituals, offerings, and divine names can be recorded, tradition becomes more stable across time and distance. Written lists of gods can organize pantheons. Hymns preserve divine titles. Administrative tablets record temple economies. Ritual instructions establish procedures. The supernatural world becomes bureaucratic. This sounds almost absurd, but it is historically important. Gods now have schedules. Offerings occur at set times. Festivals follow calendars. Temples manage resources. Priests inherit offices. Sacred knowledge can be archived. The invisible is acquired paperwork. One lesser-known consequence is that some of the earlier surviving writing is closely connected not to philosophy or epic storytelling, but to administration. Early Mesopotamian tablets record commodities, labor, and institutional transactions. Religion enters written history through the same administrative world that tracks grain and livestock. This reveals how deeply religious institutions are intertwined with economic life. The temple can feed workers, redistribute goods, support craft production, and organize large projects. A religious center may therefore be simultaneously sacred, political, social, and economic. Modern categories often separate church, state, economy, and culture. Ancient societies frequently do not. A temple festival can be worship, political theatre, economic redistribution, and community celebration at the same time. This helps explain why religion becomes so durable in early states. It is not an optional layer added to society. It is built into the institutions through which society functions. But institutional religion also changes the social meaning of gods. A local spirit does not necessarily need universal authority. A city god does. The larger the community becomes, the more important it is that supernatural beings represent collective order. Gods can legitimize rulers, treaties, laws, boundaries, and military campaigns. Kings claim divine approval. Oaths are sworn before gods. Breaking agreements becomes not only politically dangerous but spiritually dangerous. The divine world becomes a guarantor of human institutions. This creates tremendous political power. A ruler who claims personal ambition can be challenged as merely another human. A ruler who claims to act under divine order possesses a stronger ideological foundation. The pattern appears repeatedly in different civilizations, though never in exactly the same form. Mesopotamian kings often present themselves as chosen by gods. Egyptian pharaohs participate in divine kingship. Later rulers across the ancient world claim sacred descent, divine favor, or ritual authority. Religion gives political hierarchy a cosmic dimension. Yet rulers do not simply invent gods as propaganda. That explanation is too simple. The evidence shows religious traditions existing long before states and kings. Political elites inherit belief systems already deeply meaningful to communities. What changes is the way power uses them. A god that once protects a settlement can become protector of a kingdom. A ritual leader can become part of a court. A sacred building can become an economic institution. A myth can justify conquest. A festival can display political unity. The old social tools of religion scale upward. And scaling changes the gods themselves. Once a deity governs a city, the deity begins to resemble a sovereign. Once several cities are brought together under larger kingdoms, divine hierarchies can be reorganized to reflect new political realities. A local god may rise to national prominence because the city associated with that god becomes politically dominant. The history of religion begins following the history of empire. Political success can elevate a deity. Political collapse can weaken one cult while strengthening another. Conquest can merge pantheons. Migration can carry gods across borders. This reveals something fundamental about the birth of organized religion. Gods are not static ideas floating above history. They are constantly reshaped by human institutions. The earliest invisible beings may emerge from cognition, memory, dreams, death, and landscape. But cities give them bureaucracy. States give them territory. Kings give them courts. An empire will eventually give some of them ambitions far beyond the boundaries of a single town. As political power grows, the gods begin to resemble rulers more openly. They sit at the top of divine hierarchies, command lesser beings, protect territories, punish disobedience, reward loyalty, and stand behind kings who claim to govern in their name. This is not because humans suddenly invent supernatural monarchy from nothing. It is because the social world and the divine world are increasingly shaped by the same structures. When authority on earth becomes centralized, authority in heaven often becomes centralized with it. The shift is especially visible in societies where kingship becomes powerful. A village spirit may protect a local spring or lineage. A city god may protect walls, fields, and markets. But a kingdom requires a larger symbolic order. The ruler must govern people who may speak different dialects, worship different local beings, and live far from the political center. Religion can help bridge that distance by placing political authority inside a cosmic framework. A king who rules through force alone remains vulnerable to rivals. A king who presents his authority as part of divine order makes opposition more difficult to frame as an ordinary political dispute. Rebellion can become sacrilege. Tribute can become sacred obligation. Military victory can be interpreted as proof that the gods favor the ruler. This does not mean subjects simply accept propaganda without question. Ancient states are full of resistance. Rival cults, competing elites, and failed rulers. Divine claims do not guarantee obedience, but they strengthen legitimacy by linking political hierarchy to ideas already deeply embedded in social life. Mesopotamia provides many examples. Kings repeatedly describe themselves as chosen, appointed, supported, or protected by particular gods. A ruler may build or restore temples to demonstrate devotion. Military campaigns can be presented as carrying out divine will. A city's patron god can become politically elevated when that city becomes dominant. This process becomes particularly clear with Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon. As Babylon rises in importance, Marduk's status grows within Mesopotamian religion. In later traditions, he occupies an increasingly prominent position in the divine hierarchy. Political expansion and theological elevation move together. The pattern is not unique to Mesopotamia. In Egypt, royal ideology connects kingship to cosmic stability. The pharaoh's role is not merely administrative. He is responsible for maintaining Ma'at, a concept encompassing order, balance, justice, and proper cosmic arrangement. The king's rituals, temple building, military success, and political authority are therefore represented as part of maintaining the structure of the universe itself. The ruler becomes more than a manager of land and labor. He becomes a cosmic function. This is a dramatic expansion of supernatural authority because political failure can now be interpreted through cosmology. Disorder in society is not simply unfortunate. It can represent a breakdown in the proper relationship between gods, ruler, and world. A similar pattern appears wherever divine beings become associated with warfare. In small societies, supernatural protection may focus on hunting, weather, fertility, or ancestors. In states competing for territory, war gods become especially important. Victory requires more than weapons and logistics. It demands an explanation for why one side deserves to win. Gods provide that explanation. A victorious army can claim that its deity is stronger or more favorable. A defeated population must confront not only military loss, but theological humiliation. Sacred images can be captured, temples looted, and rituals disrupted. The conquest of a city can therefore appear as the defeat of its divine protector. This makes religion extraordinarily useful for empire. An empire rules different peoples who often retain local identities. It can suppress local gods, absorb them, rank them beneath imperial gods, or identify them with equivalent beings from the conqueror's own pantheon. Religious systems become flexible political technologies. Yet that flexibility also shows that gods are not simply invented by rulers. Conquerors usually cannot erase deeply rooted traditions overnight. They negotiate with them. A powerful state may adopt foreign gods. A local deity may survive conquest for centuries. A defeated community may reinterpret political loss without abandoning its religious identity. Belief has inertia. This is one reason religion cannot be reduced to elite manipulation. If rulers alone manufactured gods, religious systems would change whenever political leadership changed. Instead, traditions frequently outlive dynasties, states, and empires. A ruler can use religion, but religion also constrains the ruler. Kings must perform expected rituals. They must honor temples. They may depend on priestly institutions. A ruler who neglects sacred obligations can be criticized not merely as politically incompetent, but as cosmically dangerous. Religious authority can therefore compete with political authority even while supporting it. Priests, diviners, temple administrators, and custodians of sacred knowledge may possess influence unavailable to ordinary subjects. They can interpret omens, preserve rituals, maintain calendars, and control access to sacred spaces. In some societies, rulers need their cooperation. The gods become part of an institutional balance of power. The same supernatural logic extends into law. When agreements are sworn before gods, breaking them becomes more than a private act. Oaths invoke invisible witnesses. Treaties call upon deities as guarantors. Contracts can carry divine sanctions. Curse formulas threaten those who violate boundaries or obligations. This is socially useful because enforcement is difficult in large societies. A village elder can personally monitor a small community. A state governing thousands of people cannot watch everyone. Invisible surveillance helps fill the gap. If a person believes that a god witnesses an oath even when no human observer is present, the cost of cheating increases psychologically. The same mechanism that may once have operated through ancestor expectations now scales upward into political institutions. But early state gods are not always moral in the modern sense. Many care intensely about ritual correctness, offerings, temple maintenance, loyalty, purity, and social order without functioning as universal judges of private virtue. A god may punish a king for neglecting a shrine while ignoring behavior that later religions would classify as moral wrongdoing. This distinction is crucial. The popular idea that humans invented gods mainly to make people behave well does not fit the full archaeological and historical record. Moralizing gods exist, but they are not the earliest form of supernatural belief. Many early deities behave like powerful political beings demanding unpredictable, territorial, and concerned with respect. They resemble kings because kings resemble them. This resemblance works in both directions. Human rulers model themselves on gods, while gods absorb attributes of rulers. Divine courts appear. Gods have messengers, servants, councils, rivals, spouses, and descendants. The supernatural world becomes a political mirror. Sometimes that mirror produces strange consequences. A god's family relationships can explain alliances between cults. Marriage between deities can symbolize political integration between cities. A newly dominant ruler may promote one god above others. Theological genealogy can become a way of organizing political history. Religion becomes flexible enough to absorb conquest without losing continuity. A new ruler need not destroy the old gods. He can simply rearrange them. This process helps explain why ancient pantheons often seem crowded and contradictory. Gods merge, split, borrow titles, inherit functions, and accumulate myths from different regions and periods. What looks inconsistent to a modern reader may reflect centuries of political and cultural negotiation. A storm god becomes a king. A city god becomes universal. A local goddess becomes the mother of other gods. A defeated deity survives as a subordinate figure. Theology records power shifts in symbolic form. Yet political religion carries a risk. If the gods guarantee order, what happens when order collapses? If a king rules by divine favor, what does military defeat mean? If drought, plague, invasion, or famine devastates a loyal population, are the gods weak, angry, absent, or misunderstood? The more religion becomes connected to political authority, the more political failure becomes a theological problem. Ancient societies repeatedly confront this contradiction. Sometimes the answer is that people failed the gods. Sometimes the ruler failed. Sometimes rituals were performed incorrectly. Sometimes a foreign deity proved stronger. Sometimes theological systems are revised. Religion survives because it can reinterpret catastrophe. This ability becomes one of its greatest strengths. A failed prediction does not necessarily destroy belief if failure itself can be given meaning. A lost war can become punishment. A famine can become purification. A dead king can become a warning. The flexibility of religious explanation makes it resilient across social upheaval. But it also raises the central suspicion that has followed religion for centuries. If gods justify kings, wars, taxes, obedience, and hierarchy, perhaps religion exists mainly because powerful people find it useful. That explanation has enormous appeal. It also captures part of the truth. Elites have repeatedly used religion to legitimize authority, enforce hierarchy, and mobilize populations. But it cannot explain why belief exists before kings, why ordinary people maintain traditions that sometimes challenge rulers, why costly rituals persist without obvious political benefit, or why religious experiences appear across societies with radically different forms of government. The birth of religion is therefore not a simple story of rulers inventing gods to control everyone else. The deeper puzzle is how several forces, cognition, fear, memory, cooperation, authority, uncertainty, and genuine experience can all produce and reinforce the same system at once. The idea that religion was invented to control society is attractive because history offers so many examples of rulers using it that way. Kings claim divine favor, priests define sacred obligations, empires demand loyalty in the language of cosmic order. Laws are attached to gods, rebellions become sacrilege, and conquest is justified as holy duty. From this perspective, religion can look like one of the oldest instruments of political control ever created. Yet the archaeological record makes the story far more complicated. Belief appears long before kings, long before taxes, long before bureaucracies, and probably long before anyone possessed enough centralized power to impose a theology on an entire population. That does not make political manipulation imaginary, it makes it secondary. Once religious systems exist, powerful people can use them. But that is different from explaining why they arose in the first place. The deeper problem is that religion performs too many functions at once to fit comfortably inside a single theory. It can reduce anxiety, it can strengthen group identity, it can preserve memory, it can justify inequality, it can challenge inequality. It can help strangers cooperate. It can intensify conflict with outsiders. It can provide explanations for death. It can regulate marriage, food, property, and inheritance, it can create costly obligations that consume enormous resources. It can offer comfort while also generating fear. No single explanation fully accounts for this diversity. One major theory emphasizes uncertainty. Human beings suffer when events are unpredictable, especially when those events carry enormous consequences. Weather, childbirth, disease, hunting, warfare, and death are all examples of outcomes that ancient people could influence only partially. Ritual gives people something to do when control is limited. A ceremony before a hunt does not make prey appear through supernatural force, but it can reduce anxiety, establish a routine, and create confidence among participants. A funeral does not reverse death, but it structures grief. A rain ritual cannot command the atmosphere, but it gives a community a collective response to drought. This practical emotional effect may help rituals persist even when their supernatural claims cannot be verified. Another theory emphasizes cooperation. Humans live in unusually large cooperative networks. Kinship can explain some trust, but humans routinely cooperate with unrelated individuals. Shared religion can help identify people who accept the same norms. Costly rituals demonstrate commitment. Belief in supernatural punishment can discourage cheating. Shared ceremonies produce emotional solidarity. In this view, religion becomes a cultural system that helps solve the problem of large-scale cooperation. But the evidence is mixed. Not all religions feature powerful moralizing gods. Many supernatural beings care about ritual obligations rather than ethical behavior. Small-scale societies can cooperate without belief in an all-seeing divine judge. Secular institutions can also create trust. Religion may therefore assist cooperation without being necessary for it. A third explanation focuses on social identity. Humans are intensely group-oriented. Language, clothing, food, ornament, ritual, and myth all help distinguish insiders from outsiders. Religion provides particularly powerful markers because sacred commitments are difficult to compromise. A person can change clothing easily. Changing an inherited sacred identity can be socially dangerous. Shared gods therefore become markers of belonging. This strengthens communities, but it also creates boundaries. People who worship differently may become suspicious. Sacred differences can reinforce ethnic, political, or territorial divisions. Religion can unite one group precisely because it distinguishes that group from others. This double effect is visible across history. The same temple that gathers a community can symbolize exclusion. The same ritual that builds trust internally can deepen hostility externally. This is not unique to religion. Languages, flags, kinship systems, and political ideologies behave similarly. Religion is powerful because it combines identity with claims about ultimate reality. A fourth explanation emphasizes elite interests. Once societies become hierarchical, rulers and specialists can institutionalize belief. Temples collect resources. Priests control knowledge. Kings claim divine legitimacy. Religious calendars regulate labor. Offerings and tribute flow through sacred institutions. This clearly happens. But even here, the relationship is rarely one-sided. Priests do not merely control believers. They are themselves shaped by inherited traditions. Kings must obey sacred expectations. Temples can become centers of resistance. Prophets and reformers can attack political elites in the name of religion. A ruler may use a god, but the idea of the god also creates standards by which the ruler can be judged. This tension becomes especially clear when religion develops strong moral claims. A king who presents himself as divinely chosen may gain authority, but if divine law also condemns injustice, the same religious framework can be turned against him. Religion can legitimize power and criticize it. This makes it more resilient than simple propaganda. Another theory focuses on cultural evolution. Beliefs and rituals compete, change, and spread somewhat like other cultural traits. Practices that are memorable, emotionally intense, socially useful, or supported by powerful institutions are more likely to survive. Traditions that fail to attract followers disappear. This does not require anyone to design the system. Religion can evolve. A ritual that begins for one reason can survive because it later serves another. A local spirit can become a city god. A burial custom can become an ancestral cult. A ruler can attach political meaning to a festival that began centuries earlier. The result is historical layering. This may explain why religions often contain practices that seem inconsistent with one another. They are not designed from scratch. They accumulate. Cognitive science adds another layer. Humans readily detect agency, remember unusual beings, infer intentions, maintain relationships with absent individuals, and search for meaning in patterns. These tendencies make supernatural concepts easy to generate and transmit. Yet cognition alone cannot explain why one god becomes dominant while another disappears. Political history matters. Ecology matters. Trade matters. War matters. Demography matters. Institutions matter. This is why attempts to identify the single reason humans invented gods usually fail. Religion is not one invention. It is a cluster of behaviors and ideas that become connected over time. Death rituals may emerge from grief. Spirit beliefs may grow from dreams and agency detection. Seasonal ceremonies may develop around subsistence cycles. Ancestor traditions may strengthen lineage. Temples may emerge from communal ritual and political concentration. Moral gods may develop later in response to increasingly complex societies. Each layer builds upon earlier ones. This also explains why religion appears so different across cultures. If there were one universal cause, religious systems might look more alike. Instead, some traditions emphasize ancestors, others emphasize nature spirits, others organize vast pantheons. Some develop creator gods, some focus on ritual purity, some emphasize morality, salvation, cosmic balance, or reincarnation. The diversity is evidence of multiple pathways. The surprising part is that these pathways repeatedly produce supernatural agents. That may be where human cognition provides the common foundation. Invisible beings are socially intuitive. They can know things. They can want things. They can reward. They can punish. They can remember. A force like gravity cannot be offended. A god can... That makes gods easier to integrate into human social life than abstract principles. As societies become larger, this social usefulness grows. A village ancestor may know one lineage. A city god may protect one population. But what happens when people begin living in kingdoms and empires containing thousands or millions of strangers? The supernatural problem changes again. Local spirits may no longer be enough to unify people who will never meet one another. Trade routes connect distant communities. Empires absorb foreign populations. Cities become anonymous. Written law spreads. Individuals increasingly interact with strangers whose behavior cannot be monitored through kinship alone. Under these conditions, some religious traditions begin developing gods whose interests extend beyond one household or city. They become less local. their authority becomes wider. Their concerns increasingly include justice, honesty, oath-keeping, charity, purity, and individual conduct. The gods begin watching not only whether rituals are performed, but how people behave toward one another. This transformation does not occur everywhere, and it does not happen at one moment. But when it does, religion enters another phase. The gods become moral, and eventually, some of them become universal. As societies grow beyond the scale of villages and city-states, religion begins to confront a new problem. Human communities are now filled with strangers. Merchants travel across long distances. Empires absorb peoples with different languages and traditions. Soldiers serve rulers they may never see. Contracts bind individuals who are not relatives. Urban populations grow so large that personal reputation alone can no longer regulate behavior. In this world, the gods begin to change from local powers tied to specific places into beings whose authority can extend across entire populations. This transformation is gradual and uneven. Many ancient religions remain deeply local for centuries. A city can still have its own patron deity. A mountain, river, or temple can retain sacred importance. Household gods and ancestors continue to matter, but alongside these older forms, some supernatural beings acquire broader roles. They become concerned not merely with ritual offerings or territorial protection, but with justice, truth, oath-keeping, social order, and eventually the conduct of individuals. One reason may be scale. In small communities, the social monitoring is direct, and people know who shared food, who broke a promise, who helped during illness, and who refused to contribute. Reputation travels quickly. In large societies, this becomes harder. A person can cheat a stranger, move elsewhere, or conceal wrongdoing from neighbors. Belief in supernatural observers can partly solve this problem. A god who sees what humans cannot see changes the calculation. An oath sworn before such a being remains binding even when no witness is present. A hidden crime is not truly hidden if divine knowledge is believed to be unlimited. The social power of invisible surveillance grows with the anonymity of society. Yet scholars still debate whether large-scale moralizing gods caused complex societies or became prominent after those societies were already forming. Some research has argued that belief in powerful, morally concerned supernatural agents helps expand cooperation among strangers. Other studies suggest that highly complex societies and ritual systems can emerge before fully developed moralizing gods become central. The sequence appears to vary. What seems clear is that religion and social complexity influence each other. As states grow larger, gods can acquire broader authority. As gods acquire broader authority, they can help legitimize larger states. This feedback loop resembles earlier transformations between ritual gathering and settlement, but now it operates across kingdoms and empires. Trade is another powerful force. Merchants moving between regions carry more than goods. They carry stories, rituals, symbols, and divine names. Ports and caravan routes become places where religions encounter one another. A deity worshipped in one city can gain followers elsewhere. Foreign gods can be adopted, translated, or identified with local ones. This process can produce syncretism, the blending or identification of religious traditions. Ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern history contains many examples. Gods with similar functions become associated across cultures. Divine names change while attributes persist. Local cults absorb foreign imagery. Empires often rule populations whose gods cannot simply be erased. so religious systems adapt. The result is a supernatural world that becomes increasingly interconnected. A god is no longer necessarily confined to one valley. This matters because universality becomes imaginable. If different peoples worship different divine beings, perhaps those beings belong to one larger cosmic order. Perhaps one god rules above the others. Perhaps different gods are expressions of the same force. Perhaps one deity alone is truly universal. These ideas emerge in different forms across ancient societies. They should not be treated as an inevitable progression toward monotheism. Many complex civilizations maintain polytheistic systems successfully for thousands of years. A large empire does not require one god. Rome, for example, incorporates vast numbers of local and foreign cults while maintaining political unity. But empire creates conditions in which universal religious claims can spread more effectively. Roads connect distant populations. Writing standardizes teachings. Administrations create shared languages. Cities gather diverse communities. Political borders expand beyond traditional sacred landscapes. Religious ideas can now travel faster and farther than ever before. Literacy intensifies the process. Once religious traditions are written down, they become portable in a new way. A temple can be destroyed, but a text may survive elsewhere. A teacher can carry teachings across regions. Laws associated with divine authority can be copied. Stories about creation, justice, suffering, and human destiny can reach people separated by great distances. Writing also encourages reflection. Oral traditions can be complex and sophisticated, but texts allow religious ideas to be compared, interpreted, debated, and preserved with unusual precision. Contradictions become visible. Commentaries emerge. Specialists begin asking not only what rituals should be performed, but why the world is structured as it is. Religion becomes increasingly theological. The gods are no longer only personalities. They become concepts. Questions of justice become especially important. If divine beings control the world, why do good people suffer? Why do unjust rulers prosper? Why does a city devoted to its gods fall to enemies? These problems appear in ancient religious literature because large-scale societies make suffering visible in new ways. War, debt, inequality, disease, and political collapse affect entire populations. Religion must explain not only nature but history. One response is to moralize catastrophe. Defeat becomes punishment for collective wrongdoing. Drought becomes consequence. Prosperity becomes reward. This explanation can reinforce social norms, but it creates a dangerous theological problem. If suffering always indicates guilt, innocent victims become difficult to account for. Some traditions respond by developing more complex ideas. Justice may be delayed. Punishment may occur after death. The divine plan may be beyond human understanding. Suffering may test loyalty. Moral order may exist even when it is invisible in the present. These ideas push religion toward the afterlife in a new way. Earlier burial traditions may have imagined the dead continuing in some form. Later moral systems can transform the afterlife into a place where justice is completed. The dead are judged. Actions acquire consequences beyond death. This dramatically expands the reach of supernatural morality. A king can escape human justice. Death cannot escape divine justice. For ordinary people living under unequal systems, this can be both comforting and controlling. It promises that suffering is not meaningless. It also encourages obedience to moral rules that no human authority can fully enforce. Again, religion serves multiple functions at once. It can stabilize society. It can give hope to the powerless. It can justify suffering. It can condemn rulers. It can demand charity. It can reinforce hierarchy. Its effects depend on who interprets it and how. The emergence of moral gods also changes individual identity. Earlier ritual systems may focus heavily on community obligations, perform the ceremony correctly, maintain the ancestors, honor the temple, respect taboo. Moral religions increasingly ask what kind of person someone is. Intentions matter. Private actions matter. Inner purity can matter. A God capable of seeing the heart makes religion psychologically intimate. The divine gaze moves inward. This is one of the most profound transformations in religious history. The earliest possible spirits may have existed in caves, storms, animals, and dreams. The later moral God can exist inside conscience. A person no longer needs to stand before a sacred stone to feel observed. The sacred travels with them. This portability helps explain why certain religious movements spread so widely. A religion tied completely to one temple becomes vulnerable when people migrate or the temple is destroyed. A religion based on portable texts, personal prayer, ethical obligations, and a universal God can survive displacement. Political catastrophe can therefore strengthen rather than destroy religious identity. This pattern appears repeatedly in ancient history. Empires rise and fall. Cities are conquered. Populations are deported. Sacred buildings are destroyed. Yet traditions survive because their gods are no longer confined to those structures. A universal God cannot be captured by capturing a city. This marks an extraordinary distance from the prehistoric sacred landscape. The sacred begins in places. It ends up everywhere. Still, universality does not erase older layers. Modern religions continue to contain practices inherited from deep human history. Burial, pilgrimage, sacred meals, fasting, chanting, offerings, ritual purification, ancestor memory, sacred architecture, special times of year, and stories explaining death. The ancient layers remain visible beneath later theology. Human beings continue to gather. They continue to sing together. They continue to bury the dead carefully. They continue to visit sacred places. They continue to imagine unseen minds. Even when gods become morally universal, the older human needs do not disappear. This is why the question of why humans invented gods has no single answer. Gods change because humans change. A spirit useful to a hunter is not the same as a deity useful to a city. A city god is not the same as a universal moral judge. But each new form is built partly from what came before, and by the time universal gods emerge, religion has become one of the most powerful cultural systems humans have ever created. By the time humans begin asking whether one god rules everything, the story has already traveled an immense distance. It has moved from dark caves to crowded cities, from graves beneath house floors to temples above city walls, from animal spirits and ancestors to divine kings and moral judges. Yet beneath all of these transformations, the older layers remain. The mind still searches for agency. The dead are still remembered. Ritual still binds communities. Sacred places still gather meaning. Fear, gratitude, uncertainty, grief, hope, and wonder still push people toward explanations larger than themselves. This is why the phrase invented gods can be misleading if it suggests a single act of deliberate creation. There was probably no prehistoric council in which humans consciously decided that supernatural beings would be useful. There was no first theologian designing religion from nothing. Instead, gods appear to have emerged gradually from behaviors and intuitions that already existed for other reasons. Humans remember absent people. They imagine minds they cannot see. They dream of the dead. They detect patterns. They tell stories. They inherit traditions. They gather for ritual. They mark places. They bury bodies. They fear random disaster. They search for causes. Over thousands of generations, these tendencies can combine into invisible social worlds. The first gods, if that word even applies, may have been very different from the deities familiar from later civilizations. They may have had no fixed names, no temples, no commandments, and no universal authority. A presence associated with a cave or animal may have been enough. An ancestor encountered in dreams may have carried more emotional force than any creator god. Only later do supernatural beings become organized into pantheons. Only later do temples manage land and wealth. Only later do rulers claim divine legitimacy. Only later do gods become increasingly interested in morality. The sequence matters because it weakens one of the simplest explanations for religion, that rulers invented gods to control populations. Political elites certainly used religion, sometimes ruthlessly. But the foundations of belief are much older than the political structures that exploited them. Another simple explanation says religion arose because ancient people were ignorant of natural causes. There is some truth here too. A world without germ theory, meteorology, or modern astronomy contains many unexplained events. Supernatural explanation can fill those gaps. But ignorance alone is insufficient. Modern scientific knowledge has not automatically eliminated religion. People can understand the physical cause of lightning and still interpret their lives through spiritual traditions. Religion concerns more than explanation. It organizes meaning, identity, morality, death, belonging, memory, and hope. A storm can be explained scientifically. The death of a loved one is harder to explain emotionally. Science can describe the biological process precisely, yet description does not answer what the loss means to a community or how memory should be carried forward. That space between explanation and meaning may be one of religion's most durable territories. Death sits near the center of it. Every human culture must respond to the fact that people who seem fully present suddenly stop moving. The body remains while the social person disappears. The contradiction is psychologically difficult. Ritual gives shape to that contradiction. A burial says that this body is not ordinary matter. A grave marker says that this individual should be remembered. An ancestor ritual says that a relationship can continue after death. An afterlife says that disappearance may not be final. A god who judges the dead says that moral life can extend beyond the grave. These ideas become extraordinarily powerful because they transform mortality into narrative. Humans are storytelling animals. They do not experience life as disconnected events. They arrange memories into sequences with causes and consequences. They create identities by connecting past and future. Religion extends that narrative beyond the boundaries of one lifetime. A person can belong to ancestors who died centuries earlier. A community can imagine obligations to descendants not yet born. A god can witness both. This enlarges time itself. Religion can therefore create continuity across generations more effectively than almost any other institution. Political systems collapse. Languages change. Borders move. Yet rituals can survive for remarkable periods, often transformed but recognizably connected to older practices. Pilgrimage is one example. Humans have been returning repeatedly to meaningful places since deep prehistory. Later religions formalize the practice, but the emotional structure may be ancient, leaving ordinary space, traveling toward a special location, performing expected actions, and returning changed by participation. Sacred meals offer another continuity. Prehistoric communal feasts strengthen alliances. Temple offerings feed gods and participants. Later religious traditions preserve meals as acts of remembrance, covenant, purity, gratitude, or community. Fasting is another. It can alter consciousness, demonstrate commitment, mark sacred time, discipline the body, or express mourning. The practice appears independently in many traditions because it turns an ordinary biological need into symbolic action. Music and repetition survive too. Chanting, singing, drumming, bells, recitation, synchronized movement, and prayer all manipulate attention and emotion in ways that prehistoric ritual probably did long before organized theology existed. The technologies change. The human nervous system does not. This may be one reason religion remains powerful even when doctrines change. It operates not only through ideas but through bodies. People kneel. They stand together. They walk in procession. They wash. They fast. They eat. They sing. They touch objects. They enter particular spaces. They repeat words. These actions produce experiences that abstract belief alone cannot create. Religion is remembered physically. It is also remembered socially. A child does not usually construct a religious system independently. Belief is inherited through family and community, embedded in language, stories, festivals, rules, architecture, and routine. By the time someone is old enough to evaluate those traditions intellectually, many already feel natural because they formed part of childhood. This is cultural transmission at its most powerful. Yet traditions are never perfectly stable. Every generation interprets them again. Gods acquire new titles. Old myths gain new meanings. Rituals adapt. Reformers reject some practices and preserve others. Foreign ideas enter. Political changes reshape theology. Religions split, merge, disappear, and revive. The gods change with history because believers do. This is visible even in antiquity. A local deity can become imperial. A war god can acquire moral qualities. An ancestral cult can merge with state religion. A god once represented through an animal can later become increasingly human in imagery. A deity associated with one city can become worshipped thousands of kilometers away. There is no final form. That is perhaps the deepest answer to the question. Humans did not simply invent gods. Humans continuously reinvented them. They transformed invisible agents to match new social worlds. When people lived in small mobile groups, supernatural beings could be local and relational. When villages appeared, ancestors and sacred places gained new importance. When cities formed, gods acquired temples and estates. When kingdoms expanded, gods became rulers. When empires connected strangers, some gods became universal. When moral systems intensified, gods entered individual conscience. Each transformation solved different problems while preserving older emotional foundations. This does not tell us whether any supernatural claim is true or false. Archaeology cannot answer that question. Cognitive science can explain how certain beliefs arise without determining the metaphysical reality those beliefs describe. History can trace how gods change without deciding whether gods exist. The documentary record can only follow human behavior. and that behavior shows remarkable consistency. Humans repeatedly populate uncertainty with meaning. They repeatedly treat death as more than biological cessation. They repeatedly gather around symbols. They repeatedly imagine that actions matter beyond immediate consequences. They repeatedly create relationships with beings that cannot be seen. Sometimes those beings comfort. Sometimes they terrify. Sometimes they protect kings. Sometimes they challenge them. Sometimes they justify war. Sometimes they demand mercy. Religion contains nearly every contradiction present in humanity because religion is made through human culture. It can produce extraordinary art and extraordinary destruction. It can preserve knowledge and resist it. It can strengthen compassion and sharpen division. It can help people endure suffering and sometimes deepen suffering. No single explanation fully accounts for this because religion has never been one thing. It is memory and institution, fear and hope, politics and grief, identity and imagination, ritual and philosophy. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not that prehistoric humans imagined invisible beings. Given the structure of the human mind, that may have been almost inevitable. The greater mystery is how those invisible beings became so durable that they could outlive the people who first imagined them, survive migrations and collapse kingdoms, cross oceans and languages, and continue shaping societies thousands of years after their earliest names were forgotten. Somewhere in deep prehistory, a person wakes from a dream in which someone dead has returned. A fire is fading nearby. Beyond the shelter, darkness covers the landscape. Nothing is written. There is no temple. There is no priest. There may not yet be anything that modern people would confidently call a god. But the human mind has already learned to inhabit two worlds at once. One is visible. The other is filled with memory, intention, possibility, and beings that cannot be touched. Between those two worlds, religion begins. The story grows quieter here, because the oldest part of it was always quiet, before the stone temples and carved statues, before royal hymns and sacred books. There are only people beneath a vast sky trying to understand what surrounds them. They watch the seasons return. They watch animals migrate. They watch children grow and elders disappear. They carry memories forward because memory is the only way to keep anything from vanishing completely. Thousands of years pass, and landscapes change around them. Ice withdraws, rivers shift course, forests spread and retreat. Villages rise where camps once stood. Cities cover older settlements. Temples collapse and are rebuilt. The names of gods change, while the questions beneath them remain strangely familiar. Why does suffering happen? Why does death feel impossible to accept? Why does the world seem ordered in one moment and indifferent in the next? Why do humans feel that certain places, people, promises, and memories carry a weight greater than ordinary things? No ancient answer survives intact. Even the oldest written religions appear late in the story, after countless generations have already lived and died with beliefs archaeology can barely glimpse. What remains are traces: a hand outlined on a cave wall, ochre scattered around a grave, a skull carefully given a face again, a pillar raised on a hill, a bowl left as an offering, a temple rebuilt after destruction. Across immense stretches of time, humans keep leaving evidence that the visible world alone never seemed sufficient. Perhaps that is the most enduring image to carry away from the birth of religion, not a god descending from the sky, and not a ruler inventing a convenient lie, but people gathered together in darkness, facing a universe far larger than themselves. The fire burns lower. Faces disappear beyond its light. Above them, the stars remain silent. And somewhere between fear and wonder, between memory and imagination, humans continue doing what they have done for tens of thousands of years. They look into the unknown and give it meaning.